Yes, I did.
And what were your thoughts on it?
Well, I felt like it was all predetermined, and I felt like the last probably 15 minutes was like a testimony meeting.
Well, my thing is like, oh gosh, let's bring in the kids that have no idea about section, whatever line in the in the bill, but they were really cute. But they were really cute kids. What about you, Lisa? Did you listen in? Oh, she's not there. All right. So, what is the specific line items that are concerning to you? You're gonna have to put it on mute, John.
Jamie, I have not personally read the entire bill, so I think it might be good for us to kind of go through, or
Okay.
maybe split it up and go through different sections of it and then um, get back together on it or something. I don't know.
All right.
But I think we need to read it.
Yeah, well, we definitely do. But that's why I was hoping that Christina was here because she was going to kind of help us out with going through this on the screen. But so I'm just doing my best till she gets here. Do you have me on mute, John? Okay. All right. So go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, a couple of things that they talked about in the committee today is they talked about how this creates a new kind of category as far as it's not homeschooling, it's not public school, it's a new funding stream for someone who is not officially homeschooling their kids, but there is a way to redivert your tax dollars to homeschooling or similar to homeschooling needs. And that, I had not seen that in the bill, but that is in there. And what it actually does is it creates a category. You can't be a person who's actually signed the documentation to go into homeschooling and actually have this money. And so I think that a lot of the people that are concerned about, hey, this is pulling my rights as a parent and it's going to have strings attached and all that. I mean, there's actually specific wording in this that this isn't even affecting those people who don't want who don't want the funds because they are afraid of that. And that was something that I hadn't understood until Lisenby said that today.
All right. So
One of the problems that I have with them saying that is that, and Gail would say this too if she were on, I don't know if she was on, whenever you have a category of homeschoolers that is being supervised, it extends to the other homeschoolers.
But
It's done that. It did that in California. I think it's probably doing that in Arizona.
But California's Ed Choice setup is very similar to what we have when we talk about My Tech High. When you take their what they call an ESA, which really isn't, you're putting your kids back in the public school system. It's no different. Well, it is, but it's actually very similar to My Tech High. So you've got 11,000 kids right now throughout the state doing My Tech High. This adds another 6,000 people into that, people that want to teach at home but have access to some of their tax dollars without getting into the, hey, I don't trust the government, because I'm with you on that. But as a taxpayer, I can see value in saying, hey, I really don't want my tax dollars going to public ed for me to have to shell out all this money if I'm going to homeschool my own child. So I can see the value of it, and there's a lot in the language that I still am dissecting, but I think that it's really important to make that distinction that it's not the same bucket as someone who is homeschooling that just says, hey, I'm opting out, peace out, I'm done.
something somebody I heard Candace say is she said she's like for her she sees it as though you can still be a homeschooler and not just accept the funds, and then you can decide that you want to accept the funds. And she said that you would have to take the assessment if you accepted the funds. So go with Kim Hope. That's what I was hearing her say at the hearing.
In the actual bill language, you have to opt in to have an assessment. There's no, you have to take a test or you have to opt in. The language right now, as it's written, and I apologize, I haven't seen the first substitute, but as it's written right now, unless it changed in the first substitute, you have to opt into testing, not opt out. So it's exactly the same.
Jamie, who's talking?
So Joe.
Who is talking right now?
This is Joe Johnson.
Joe Johnson. Okay, hi Joe.
Yeah, so Joe Johnson, he went to the he's a conservative, he says. He went to the Allison Sorensen event last night with Joe Carey, and he went there to ask questions. And so he's not here to try to change our mind. He's here to he is more in favor of the bill, but he's also here because he doesn't want to say that that he voted for something without also coming and hearing like people with valid opinions as well. So that's who I know Joe to be. So
thank you.
You're welcome, Kristen. So all right, so we've got requires eligible schools and service providers to meet certain standards to be eligible to receive scholarship funds.
Yeah. So one thing that might be easier as we go through this, because I mean this bill is 50 pages.
Right.
I'm not a bill reader, so I don't know if every bill does this, but they've put every section of code in here, and then they've just redlined what they've changed. And so if you scroll through it and you look for what's underlined, that's actually what they're adding into the code. Or if you see a strikeout on something, you can see what they're taking out. So this is all in the code right now, what you're showing. And it goes for a couple of pages till there's really much of a change. Like the first change is page 4, when it just, in its list of definitions, it adds in the Hope Scholarship. And so, I mean, you don't get into
which line?
On my copy, it's line 118, so I would assume it's
page 4.
Page 4 is so right there. It looks like they've.
So they probably updated it from yours.
Yeah, they've put in some other note to code in there. So all that's doing is it's just saying whatever the reporting is, the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program is part of that, which is just a code thing.
So did you guys hear what the requirements are? Because somebody made a point. They said, are you not concerned that we have I guess the polygamous community where they have, a lot sometimes that I don't know. And I'm like, what did they say the requirement was? Do you guys know the requirements of how you had to be eligible? Was it how many kids you have and how much you made?
No, I don't know. That's probably why we should read it.
Yeah. How do you qualify? What are the qualifications? Okay. I wonder how far Christina is. Okay. So that is one of the questions that we should definitely write there. I'm going back up to the top. I know it's a big bill, but we need to also. Oh, here's Steve Christiansen. Yay. Hi, Steve. How are you? Traffic, indeed. Yeah, I heard Christine in a minute. Steve.
So you can go to the qualifications on page 14.
Okay.
Steve's an expert at this.
Steve, do you want
So
to
here's a
kind
question. Online
help with
79, it says
going through
section
the bill?
1, section 53E, and Steve Christiansen
Yeah,
will know
like
the
in
answer
front
to
of the
this question.
laptop? like
It
things and
says
concerns that you've had, like you do in our
this,
utility
this
council?
section is amended to read, and then it tells you what it says. When was it amended? Is that amended as part of this bill, or was it amended at some other time?
On what, where does it say that?
It's line 79. I remember a bill just a couple of, probably 2 sessions ago, where it contained, because they had rewritten and moved code, they didn't underline it because it was existing code, or maybe they did underline it, even though it was existing code, because they moved it to a new section. And so when people were reading it, they thought it was all new, but it was actually old code that was just being moved somewhere else. So I'm wondering, is it possible to have stuff that is amended that isn't underlined?
So let me.
Is that ever a possibility?
Here's something that happened that was kind of interesting. So when I discovered that they were still leaving, here, I'll run it. So when I had discovered, you can take notes for now. When I had discovered that they were still, they had a clause in there about, I think I spoke to you, Christian, about this. This is when they were wanting to do donations. When I came across that in the bill, I had called several people and said, and asked them, hey, did you see what I just, anything about donating? And they said, Christian said that, not Christian, but Christina and I were talking about the money, outside money. That was one of my concerns about this bill, bringing in outside money from donors. And so I kind of got pissy and spoke to Candace last night. Perucci called me about 8:30, 9 o'clock last night. And she said, hey, look, that was not supposed to be in the bill, the portion about donating. She says that was part of another bill that was the opportunity bill credit. And I'm thinking, so are we not writing new bills, or are we just combining portions of bills into another bill? Because that is the only way it should have been there, because there was that whereas the law writers were supposed to have taken it out.
And the first substitute that they just passed today in committee.
Steve Christensen's here, guys.
The first substitute bill that they just approved and adopted in committee, they took that out.
They did take it out?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they took that portion out. But here's my problem with the bill. Now, I haven't made a decision on the bill yet because I haven't read the entire bill, well, the bill in its entirety. But I do have a problem right off the bat without reading the bill. And Steve, you know this better than anyone, I'm sure. Candace is one of the co-sponsor of this bill. When you're a co-sponsor of the bill, you would think you would have read your own bill. She did not know this was in the bill. So my next question is, how much more do they not know that's in this bill that we haven't discovered yet?
Are you talking about Candace?
Yeah, Perucci.
Right, and also how much misinformation is out there. This is Lisa, by the way, everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, I was in a conversation with a legislator about what was on the Utah Fits All website, and it was before I had taken a screenshot of what they said there was going to be a data wallet, and I asked him about it, and he said, well, they're supposed to take that off. And I said, well, why was it on there in the first place? And he told me it's because the people who ran Arizona's bill are also working on this, and they're managing the website. It has nothing to do with Perucci or Cullimore. And I said, well, how do they know then there isn't misinformation being spread about this bill? It's a good question.
I mean, I personally believe there's a lot of traps in this bill that we have not yet discovered. And look, what they did today, they brought in a bunch of kids in pink and mint shirts because they couldn't get enough adults to wear them. The thing is with me with this bill is they're playing on emotion on the other side. Look, I want school choice. You know, I want a good bill as well, though. That's the problem. They think we don't want this as in our state, but no, we do. We just want good quality bills, and this is what this is all about for me. Is trying to have Joey here, somebody who's for the bill, And then me, myself, I haven't even made a decision yet. I know how I'm leaning, I can tell you that, and most people can too. But I just think we just need to figure this out because we only have a few days left. It's gonna go to the Senate. And now I do know some senators that are not for the bill right now as it sits. But who knows what's gonna happen tomorrow. Now, I will tell you this also. I spoke to Heidi from Libertas today outside of, in the
AFP.
well, no, AFP, but we're at the Congress, the representative building.
In the House.
In the House, Representative House. And I asked her a question point blank. She said, Heidi, tell me something. Why are you guys pushing this bill so heavily initially? These are her words to me. Last year, we lost momentum because obviously everybody was talking about the bill, it got some attention, politicians were afraid. So this year they pushing the bill because they need it while the momentum is good. So we've got to figure out a way to slow it down. I don't know if it's possible right now because the longer it stays in the atmosphere and people can see it, the more pushback they'll get. So, but when we go to war, we got to have our ducks in a row. And I've told, it's like I was telling Christina today, I said, Christina, if they vote yes on this bill, we still don't stop fighting till the end of the day of voting. We still can change some things, but we got to learn what we need to change. And this is why I wanted to put this together and why I wanted to stream it live so people can see what's going on in this meeting. So I'm not the best guy to operate, so you guys can talk. And Steve, would you be willing to run this operation for a little bit, the Zoom, at least while you're here?
I'm very happy to participate and run it if I know what that means.
It's kind of a last minute thing. This is all last minute.
We're just going through the bill and
Yeah.
talking about sections and then coming up with questions that we're taking to our legislators.
Okay. And I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
My only challenge is I read the original version of the bill top to bottom. I have not read, other than scanned, the first substitute as I was sitting in the committee meeting today.
So you're much further than I am.
So I have a rough idea of the changes in the first sub, but I understand the original bill much
Isn't that
better.
what's online right now, the first sub?
It's what was adopted, and so it should be the one online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the one online.
Can't access it, do you have Wi-Fi?
Yeah. Mike, would you give them the password?
I mean, maybe let's start here then, because it is a lengthy bill. I mean, I think your point on line 78 and 79 is, as the bill amended, do we know that the only things that are changing in current Utah code are what's underlined? Because that was my understanding coming into it. That's what I really focused on. If it wasn't underlined, I wasn't digging deep.
If it's not underlined or stricken through, then
It's current code.
it's current code.
So I think we could actually maybe even go and look at what's changing in the code and say, is this meaningful? And talk through that.
Well-
I'd like to have a quick conversation first, though, before we do
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And
Can you guys hear Steve okay?
I can.
Okay.
okay. I'd like to get a feel from everybody that has talked to representatives in the House and the Senate as far as how much support does either the original or the first sub, I don't care. How much support does this bill have? I attended the committee meeting this afternoon, not all of it, but I wanted to listen to the comments that were being made by the representatives as they were summarizing after the debate. And obviously, the final vote was, I think, 10-4 or 12-4, something like that. And the only two Republicans that spoke against it, Representative Pulsifer and Peterson, said that they would vote for the bill if a couple of things could change. And so you also have sitting on that committee, you've got Schultz and you've got Lisenby from leadership. You've got Moss, highly respected. And all of the other comments that were made were really positive. And I'm thinking, okay, this sounds like it's a bill that's going to pass. And so, from a strategy standpoint, we've got two choices, in my opinion, and I'd love to know from everybody, number one, does it also sound to you like it's a bill that's going to pass? And if not, I'd love to hear your perspective, because what I heard today sounds like a bill that's going to pass. And then number two, if it is a bill that's going to pass, then we've got two choices. We fight like heck, and we're okay going down in flames. And number two is we identify the things in the bill that we absolutely cannot live with, and we work with the sponsor and propose amendments and get it changed. So those are my initial comments. Number one, those of you that have talked to representatives and senators, does it sound to you like this is a bill that's going to pass? Or do you think do you feel like there's still quite a gap between who supports it and what is needed to get it passed?
After today, I want to say it's probably going to pass. But I'm usually a glass half full type of person because I'm from California and I'm jaded and I'm used to losing. So, but I cannot wrap my head around how conservative, I would say conservative legislators are supporting a government-funded program such as this, of government expansion, and even the principles I've laid out. And so I think that there are some that are really concerned about this, but I think once they get their asks into the bill, it'll pass. That's
And
my
do you think that those asks
Can I ask
will...
a favor?
Yeah.
Well, hey, somebody needs to open the door for Christine.
Yeah, we're going down right now.
Okay. And B, if you guys, the ones who are in the room, when you start talking, would you say this is Steve, or this is Jamie, or this is Joe?
This is Gloria.
That was the glorious Gloria.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gloria.
Kristen, I'm sorry, this is Joe. I'm sorry you confused my voice with Gloria's. I know my voice sounds amazing, but it happens all the
No, I
time.
did not.
And that's a good idea, Kristen. So we've got Lynn. I'm not sure who Lynn's iPhone is.
Hello.
Oh, hi. So Lynn,
Hi.
tell us about yourself so we can just kind of see who's here in the room with us while we're talking.
Okay, it's quite unexciting, but I'm here in Provo, and I represent a group of parents, and we have a website that tries to give everybody enough information so that if they have questions about anything that's going on, they can go into that website and ask to anybody. And so I just stay in touch with everything that's going on. I may not be able to make all the meetings, but my ears are big. So
Awesome.
That's-
And what's
I'm
your
a
website?
retired
What's your website called?
it's schoolwatch.group is the website address, and I just retired from education, and so I'm quite schooled in the ways of the educating crowd of people and what they do.
Awesome. So what are your thoughts on the bill?
Well, it makes me very nervous because my experience in the past is to the power of the education itself and getting what they want to do. They talk the big talk, but they have an underlying reason for everything that they say and do. So yeah, I'm worried about the bill. So I'm really appreciating everybody's comments and what we can do once they say this bill is okay to go, because I think that's about knowing education as they do. I think that's the way it's going to go.
Okay. And then we got Kristen and Lisa on. That's all that I see. So. Christina Botches is here with us.
It's bogus.
Bogus.
I really don't care, but if I don't correct, then everybody just says it wrong.
It's okay. I get called Jaime all the time. Or Jamie Renda.
Sorry.
I have done
But
that
you've
before.
also, online, Jamie, you've also got Stephanie Grant, Tiffany Barker, and Natalie, who I think is probably Natalie Klein, is that right?
Oh, okay.
Where are they
And
not showing?
Lisa Logan. is on there.
Oh,
Yeah, if
okay.
you click
Oh,
participants,
we have
it
7
should
people,
show
you're
you.
right, we're just only showing 4. Sorry about that. No, just hit participants, the box, yeah. Yeah,
Oh, Stephanie Grant, Natalie, Lynn's
okay, and Natalie, is this Natalie Klein?
No, it's Natalie Clausen. Do you hear me?
No, close.
Yeah. Not Natalie, yeah.
Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
Awesome, well, welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, so I hope nobody was expecting a presentation. I mean, we of course have done this in the past, but this was really an impromptu get together and just start going through these bills and our concerns, and then taking what we heard today and taking it back and getting those questions answered. And then, but Steve has a really good point, you know, looking to see what support they have. And then, so Steve, that really kind of is, like, for me personally, what was most important is if there is so much support for this, my main thing is like, John, we have to go through and we have to see these words that could be stronger with legal jargon. And if that's all, that's what we have to do. I mean, like, of course, like, if we feel like it's something that we're not gonna support, then we just let that known, we keep decorum, we state our points. But I think for me, because it sounds like there's so much support, I just wanted to get all the T's crossed and I's dotted.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you guys feel?
For me, for me, the fight is, look, I think they're gonna pass the bill. From the people that I spoke to, from the House and the Senate side, look, there was a few guys from the Senate are not really crazy about it. And there's a few guys from the House that are not crazy about it, but a few is not enough when it comes to this bill because overwhelmingly it's popular. And the problem is what they did today, and for those who have seen it on TV, they played on emotion.
Oh,
They brought
it
all the
was so
kids in
gross.
their little mint green shirts on, and look, and I looked at the line, and from my personal evaluation, not one damn one of them read the bill.
No.
Not one of them read the bill. None of them know what we pulled out before, what we had changed in the bill. They don't know anything about that. So their mindset isn't, okay, wait a minute, if you forgot about something as important as the donation, because that's an easy way into this bill for the other side, what else did you forget? Why are we rushing this bill? What else could you have possibly forgotten that compromised this
I have a
bill?
list.
Oh, so you've already got your questions written down, huh?
And so,
I don't know if you can say that, but,
So,
and I did pull sub 1.
Christine, how many representatives have you talked to? And what is the sense that you have
My
about
sense
this
is they
bill?
are overinflating their path to the finish line. I've gotten phone calls, Christina, we desperately want you to come so we can get your support behind this bill. We really need your voice because there's like at least 3 people who really listen to you. And I'm like, I don't know if you're just feeding my ego, but I don't know of any legislator up there that would just do what Christina told them to do. However, if that's the case, that means they don't have the votes. And so if they can say, even Christina supports it and flip 1, it can flip the vote. I don't think they have the support they say they have, for a multitude of reasons. One is the UEA took a hard stand against this bill last night, and we've got over half our legislature funded by the UEA. We also have a governor that when they split this bill, probably for constitutional reasons, he will reject it.
Right, that's right.
He will veto it. And so I think, they might, I know other people disagree with me on that. I know these 2 women are 2 of them that think it's gonna pass. I don't think it is. I think they've overinflated their numbers, and I think they've done that because I've had other people told me it's not fully baked. We don't have the votes. It's not fully baked. We don't have the votes.
and it's funny that you mentioned that, because now that you say that, they called me last night. 8 o'clock, 8:10, and 8:25. John Johnson, Carrie Ann, and Perucci. I never spoke to Perucci before until now. They all call me and say, hey, John, we pull this out. I'll make sure it's out of the bill before it goes in committee, that issue that we were talking about. So
But they've known about that issue for a year and a half. This is not new. They knew that was in there, and I'm not joking, John. I would bet you 50 cents and maybe even a whole paycheck that it comes back in a subsequent draft.
And what is that part?
The outside funding sources, because it's a 501c3, and I just use Bill Gates as an example. I don't know that he's gonna dump money into Utah, but they've used these schemes before, and they put this donation thing in there that they can accept outside donations as a 501c3. And then what happens is these people who wanna play with Utah's economy come and they just massively influx of funds. And then what will happen too is you'll see private schools spring up in Blanding and Juab, and in some of these small towns, you'll see these private schools, and then the public schools literally will go out of business. And then they've put our entire education system under a 3P partnership with unelected bureaucrats because they've injuncted, which is unconstitutional. There is unconstitutional language in this bill, in my opinion. But what will happen is those small towns really will put their public school system out of business because of that 3P relationship. And they'll just build these big buildings, and one of the fastest ways to do that is for them to push the money in on one side and pull it out on the other side. And it's the same people, so they're actually kind of keeping their own money.
How is that even possible though? Educate me, because if I'm a 501c3 and I'm taking all this money from the Gates Foundation because my intent is to take Nephi and put them out of the public ed business because I hate all people from Nephi or whatever it is, and so I create my own private school. How is giving money to a program manager that's set up in a 501c that the only thing he can do is disperse funds up to $8,000 a year per student? How's that money even used?
Okay, here's how that. So now, if it was me, for example, and I deal with 501c3s, and I know how the structure goes. So if it was me, for example, I would say, take the state money, because I'm a private entity. I'm a 501c3. I'm a nonprofit, nonpartisan nonprofit at a 501c3. It's not a 4, it's a 3. According to Perucci, it's going to be a 3. So they are business. They are private. They're not part of the government. So what I would do is simply this: the state's going to pay me $2.5 million. Now, but I'm a business. I'm greedy. I want to go bring in somebody else and let them donate money to these schools as well, like the Gates Foundation, like the Bezos Foundation, like the Act of Blue, all these other organizations. So what they do is then they still make a commission by putting the money out for the Gates organization.
So they come in as an aside and say, yes, I'm here to give you $8,000 a year, but on top of that, here's another funding source outside of the state of Utah.
Because that's outside of state money. The state money is only $8,000. Somebody else can come in and say, no, we'll add an additional $5,000 to that and make it more enticing to the schools. So, but let me finish the joke. So what happens is when the school receives all this money and they create curriculum and program based on this money, then somebody like Act of Blue or the Gates Foundation says, look, you know what? We want you guys, COVID pops up again. Well, we want you guys to wear masks again. What happens? If you don't do it, we'll pull that funding. Well, the schools are dependent on that money now.
Yeah.
And so, and the other dynamic is this: if they truly wanted to give it to another school, why do they need to go through the program? Why don't they just donate directly to the schools?
So I'm not fully tracking about why not donate directly to the schools. Are you talking about?
No, if they wanted to just donate altruistically,
Oh, I
they
understand.
just donate straight to the school.
Straight to the school,
Why
which
would they
would
use
provide
us?
scholarship
Exactly.
opportunities for students who wanted to attend that school.
Exactly.
Yeah, these are good questions, but I don't think this is about providing scholarship opportunities. I think when people, and when I say this, when people donate through that outside funding mechanism, typically it's not about kids who need the money. There's a different thing. When you see this play out in other states, there's almost always an ulterior motive that plays out.
Where has it played out, though? I mean, from a factual basis, where have we seen outside money coming in and closing rural schools in America? Where, through Ed Choice? Have we ever seen this happen?
And I'm not saying they're gonna talk about, we're not talking about closing the schools. That's not the issue that I'm looking at. The issue I'm talking about is
Well, no, I mean, that's just the point that Christina
buy-in,
made.
influence is what I worry about.
So how do you structure this then in a way that that this program manager, that is his business to create this program, not to take outside sources, not to have this be a side gig for, distributing Bill Gates money for him? I mean, how do you change language in this?
Well, according to Candace, they're gonna encapsulate the program, so there's no outside money coming in at all. That was what the change was in one of the subs.
Yeah, that's right. And they've already adopted that.
Exactly, exactly. That's why so we're talking about something that we've already
It's no
stopped.
longer an issue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whether it's in some other bill, I don't know, but this one is out of it.
Yeah.
I'd like to just say, we didn't have bill language until Monday night, very late. And it's already in committee and passed. So all we had to work on were the principles. And I loved the principles that Jen came up with. And if I could share those.
I think you
Because
should.
I don't understand, because we didn't have this. So because we didn't have bill language, I think my question is she came up with like an 8-pronged conservative approach. And I have not had anybody be able to answer these questions for me yet. So let me start with the first one.
By the way, you did great today.
Okay,
Yes.
and I
would
met with
concur.
legislators on
Rockstar
Tuesday.
today.
You did great today.
Oh, thank you.
Word out,
You did
Muhammad
great.
Ali was over there like air punching for
Can we
you.
get a copy of the questions? Like maybe send a picture or something?
Of what?
Of your question?
They're comments, but yes, I can send them to you. So number one is, it's the government's responsibility is to prevent monopolies, not to create competition. That is the role of the free market.
Amen.
Do we agree?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Is anybody opposed to that?
So how does this bill create a monopoly when you're
Anytime
creating?
government creates, it's not the free market. That's government.
I don't know that I agree with that, but go ahead.
I would love to hear the opposing side of that.
Well, maybe taking a step back, I mean, since we're talking philosophy more, let me tell you why I support it. So I had a son who sat through Leah Kenyon's chemistry class being told your parents are dumb. You are stupid. Get the hell out if you don't like the way I talk, if you don't like the way I think. If you don't agree with my ideology, I'm gonna open up a can of whoop ass on you. My son endured that for a year. Why shouldn't my tax dollars go to a place where I can find a safe space for my son that he doesn't have to endure that going forward?
So I came from LA 2 years ago, and I had 4 of my kids in the public ed system, and my second daughter experienced my oldest daughter experienced very traumatic issues all the way up to the court level because of an abusive teacher, because she had a learning disability. And it was about maybe when she got into 6th grade, 7th grade, I decided to pull them out of the LA, right, out of the California public ed. And we lived under the poverty level, okay? And you don't have a choice where your tax dollars go there. And raising my 4 children under the poverty level in California, there's sacrifices that you have to make to be able to, because I didn't want government strings attached. And I didn't want government telling me how I could and couldn't teach my children. Now there's a 7-year age gap between my son, my youngest, and my 3 older children. And when he was in 6th grade and Common Core came in, I let him try Common Core for 1 year. He was a straight A student who went down to a DF student because he didn't want to learn or couldn't learn the way the new Common Core standard was. So they failed him. And I said, you're coming home. And I volunteered at the school and I did all these things to help him. Even got him a tutor and he got the answer right, but because it wasn't the way they wanted him to get it, they failed him. So my point is that we created these little micro things, right? Because when you're in California, you are completely ostracized and you are completely autonomous from, you can't join in the local school to go take an art class, or you can't do any of the choices that you have here in the state of Utah. And public money, so marketing campaigns came out at probably upwards of $20-30 million into California, marketing campaigns for you to take the funding, okay, to homeschool your child. And every one of my son's friends in the micropods took those funds. Guess how long it took for them to be completely captured? Like SEL, comprehensive sex ed, critical race theory. 3 years. 3 years. First year you could use your religious curriculum. Second year was like, we're gonna take that away, but you could still supplement with it. It was just like within 3 or 4 years, the government completely took over that. And now 0 micropods exist because everybody became dependent on the government funding. They literally became dependent, and they were subject to assessment and regulation within 3 to 4 years.
But that's not the standard for ESAs. But I think back to the point of a monopoly, if I say, hey, I want my son or your kids to have a different experience, what exists right now is 93% of people satisfied with public ed, which is awesome. But for those 7% that aren't, you're taking your tax dollars and you're reallocating where that funding's going instead of
The
public ed.
government is reallocating.
Sure, but you know what? We build roads too, and we reallocate that. Instead of building I-15, I'm going to build I-215 so that I can choose a different path of how I'm going to get to work. I am taking those tax dollars and taking them away from the monopoly, and maybe not taking them away, that's a bad way to say it, but I'm taking those tax dollars and I'm allocating them in a way that as a parent, I think I can find the best path to my child's success. I don't see that as a monopoly. I see that as, you know, a government being understanding of their single answer doesn't fit all people. Because I think what we have right now is public ed and a monopoly where things like what happened to my son, there's no recourse for it. I mean, you know, but I mean, I understand from what you're saying from a preventive monopoly, but I don't see that as being monopolistic.
But the thing is, what's beautiful here in Utah is when I brought my son here 2 years ago, he was able to join in 3 different schools. So if that's not choice, I don't know what is.
But does this change that? When this bill's passed, does he still have the ability to do that?
Well, I would never take the funds. I didn't take them in California. I'm not going to take
Okay.
them now. But however, right, we have to look long term where like right now, if you take the funding as a homeschool parent, let's say you're homeschooling your son right now. I don't know if you are, but if you were, let's say you're homeschooling your son. They just admitted today that when you decide to take the funds, you give up your affidavit and you're no longer considered a homeschool student.
Exactly.
You are a publicly funded student at home.
Absolutely, but you're not. It creates a new category, and I think that's part of this. This is a buffet. It's not a monopoly. It's saying I can choose how I'm going to do it. Right to the point that I'm saying I'm signing out.
Actually,
of
I
the
would
system.
disagree with that. You actually can't choose. You can say, I like these people, and they can approve or deny them as a qualified provider. So you
That was
might get to
spoken about
choose.
today.
You get to choose among government-approved options. You don't actually get to choose. Those are 2 fundamentally different things.
But the language and the intent is the bill is that it is your choice to use the provider of your choice. Now, whether it's a automatic payment or I go in and I get pre-approved for it, I mean, it's like an HSA, not, you know, I mean, you're going to have a list of preferred providers. And then you're going to say, well, hey, my doctor isn't there. How do I get him there? And you work through those challenges. You know, I can go find the curriculum that fits my family's needs. And then, you know, on day 1, there's probably no curriculum
But
in
could you
there.
not do that now?
I don't think it really changes a lot from what you're doing now, except in saying, you know what, you're giving more families that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to teach their children at home because they want to take their kids out of the system because for whatever reason, their kids aren't safe. And that's the number 1 reason people leave public ed is they feel like they don't have a safe space. That's not meaning that there's violence or bullying or anything else, but they feel like that's not the best situation for their children. And now you're taking people that otherwise wouldn't have that ability and giving them an option. I mean,
But
it's
is there
putting
not
one.
option now? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I know several people that would like to homeschool their kids, but they can't do it. And
Right.
I know Christina has a different opinion on this than I do. But if you go in and you say, hey, you know what, we're in a two parent household, but we are both working to make ends meet, and we're going to choose between putting food on the table or pulling our kids out of public ed, the kids stay in public ed most times. And I have people that I know very well that are in that situation.
We were in that situation.
And they make that choice. And I think this opens up the buffet to someone saying, hey, there's a new opportunity here. And I just don't see that from a monopolistic side. I don't think that is being a monopoly tendency. Sorry, Kristen.
Someone had a question.
Was that Kristen?
She said, have you
It
read?
was, yeah, I was just wondering, are we reading the bill yet?
No, but I did want to just, if I could just cover these, and then if you guys want to add something after that, let me just get through this. It's the role of the free market was the last sentence. Number 2, private businesses should not be subsidized by taxes or they will cease to be private. Education is not an exception. These, I already gave you credit for this. Okay, so, that was confirmed, right, in the meeting the other day. It was confirmed, and so I said, let's go off of the premise that once a homeschooler takes the funds, they give up the affidavit, and now they are a publicly funded student at home. So now they are still a public student at home. And there's rules and regulations that will have to be followed.
And it has to be viewed that way, otherwise it's unconstitutional.
Right, and then at that, I asked if that is the premise, then if a private school takes those public funds, is it now a private school, a publicly funded school? Now does it become no, it's still private school. Well, that's a contradiction. That's not true. Once a private school.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I have to pardon my voice because I'm getting over some lame bug, but my concern is too, we're talking about taking either state or federal money and being able to put them towards schooling, whether it's in private or in your own home. And any time, and you guys know this, that you take anything that belongs to somebody else, which is obviously a government of some sort, there is some type of string attached to that. So you're no longer autonomous. But what my question is too, is that those people who do not take funds from the state or the federal government, and they choose to homeschool, I don't know how private schools can do it, but at least on the home front, what kind of consequence will they eventually have to face if they say, hey, we're going to do it our way? I mean, I've been in the educational field my whole entire life, and I've watched them do that. Somehow education thinks that they are an entity all to themselves, and they're going to get pushed through whatever they want. And the words of the NEA president are ringing loudly in my ears at this time. That she's going to change the face of our children, and the whole course of America is up to her. So anytime you have money that has anything to do with an entity that is more powerful monetarily than you, there's a price to pay. So I'm wondering how this is all going to affect those people that don't want anything that they say is free. They want to do it on their own. How is this going to impact them?
Well, I know for sure it's going to impact the private school community. Because
Yeah.
as we know with higher ed, when the subsidies came in, it highly increased the tuition amount for colleges. And so, I think even if parents who choose not to take the money, they're going to have to end up spending more money on private school solutions. And then when those private schools solutions, their tuition goes up, the subsidy that the parents get is not going to be enough, and then they're going to have to raise that, and then it's going to have to raise people's taxes. I mean, it's just a slippery slope.
Well, and that's true with the private schools. I can totally see that happening. But if you have homeschools, you have co-ops or these pods, or however you want to identify them, how will this impact homeschoolers that refuse to take any money?
Is your question, how does this bill help homeschoolers that refuse to take any money?
Yeah, what's going to work against them? I mean, I want to know.
Oh, yes, it absolutely will work against them. Free market principles
Yes.
say it will work against them. Free market
and I
principles
wanna
say
know
that it will
how.
work against any private school who refuses to take the money. That's
So
just a
I've got
reality of
parents-
basic economics.
And that's exactly right. and I have parents right now. I know that I'm working with some people on putting together curriculum, but I know I've got parents that they said, I'm done with it. They pulled their kids out of school. And so they're trying to manage that situation at home. So what I want to know is, how is this going to affect what the legislature pushes through? How is this going to affect people who are trying to just work it through without somebody's pocket in their face? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask? I'm probably not very clear. I know my voice isn't very clear, but do you understand
Well,
what I mean?
I think we do understand what you mean. And it's a concern that a lot of us have.
I would agree with Kristen.
I would suggest we go back and finish the list of principles. They're good principles. And then I think something that I said earlier may not be relevant here. I was under the impression that everybody in this meeting was likely not supportive of this bill. And so that's why I started the conversation the way that I did. If we have a mixture of people in this meeting, it probably makes the most sense to just go through the bill.
Yes.
And see what we suggest ought to be changed.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Let's go through the last two. When government uses taxes to pay for a program, there will be government regulations. There has to be an accountability for the money. And 5, a moral way to relieve parents from the burden of school taxes when they choose to homeschool or use private options is to give them either a tax exemption or write-off on their income taxes and or property taxes that are currently used for public education. This is the avenue we should pursue. So based off of those principles, I don't understand how anybody in a conservative legislature could vote for this. We have almost 700,000 students in the public ed system, correct me if I'm wrong.
719, I believe.
This is gonna affect 5,000. And then they wanna increase it, which only means increase of more money in taxes and continued. And they're using this out of the surplus, am I wrong? What happens when that surplus?
It's not so grand like it was last year.
So to be fair and sporting, the way I read the bill is that in subsequent years, they're gonna pull from the public ed fund, whatever that is gonna be named at that point in time, that they're gonna siphon the money. The bill language reads to me like they're gonna siphon the money from the public education system into this parallel system.
Doesn't that happen by default? I mean, just from a funding perspective, my understanding, if I don't understand this right, correct me, but in October, they take a census of what kids are in the school, and that is what the WPU is based off of the following year. So now when you pull 6,000 kids out of the system in 2 years, you're going to have a WPU total dollar amount 6,000 kids less than what it was. So I mean, you're artificially to a small number when you're talking 6,000 to 719,000. It's a small number, but the way funding works, unless I'm wrong, Christina, I think that is what's going to happen is you're going to offset the cost of this in public ed at some point, just the way, the nature of funding.
I think that's right. That makes sense. But I don't think we need to get hung up on this at all, because after that constitutional amendment was passed a couple of years ago that allowed some additional latitude in terms of funding sources for education, I don't think we need to worry about that point any longer.
Okay, let's dig in. I think you have, Christina, I think you should lead out on this.
Honey.
Because you have the best, and I have not read the sub, so I.
So I read the sub terse, which,
What happened?
you know, I don't know, you shared your screen and it got kicked off. So I guess,
So I've been reading while you guys were talking. So I can tell you where some of the things are, or we could just go through it. Maybe we should just go through it.
I think if you go down and click on, sorry, right here, I think that'll bring it back up.
The meeting has been ended.
are we still streaming live?
Yeah, you're still on live, but Jamie, you want to get this back on?
Can I sing? Nobody knows.
Everybody's just gonna.
Well, it'll kick everyone off if the meeting ended, right?
Come. Why is it? Just so people out there in the La La Land can listen to us and understand what this is all about and the bill's all about and why we're. Because a lot of people are naive to bills. For example, you have a bunch of people there today who's cheering a bill that they really don't know.
Yeah, they were cheering a bill they'd never read.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like politicians who vote for bills that they've never read. So that's why we streaming so people can look at it. Right now to my website, there was almost 200 people.
Yeah, I didn't know we were streaming.
That was over.
I'm like,
Well,
well, I'll own that.
What happened?
I don't know what's going on.
There you go.
Reclaim host.
Well, if we want to get started with a high level conversation about the bill, I think
I think
num-
that would be
We
a
could
lot
do that,
more
yeah.
expeditiously.
expeditiously, I think the number one issue with it is it's an omnibus bill.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
if, first of all, those bills are unconstitutional. They've been rejected by ruling before, and they've been shot down. And I think if we're a conservative state and we claim to be conservatives, why are we putting forth a bill that we know when challenged in court, there's precedent to overturn it?
And you know that they have that concern because there's language toward the end of the bill that addresses that.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me that there's a very clear understanding that wrongdoing is taking place, but we're gonna ignore that and try it anyway. And to me, that's a DC tactic. That's a tactic, if I can speak spiritually, Jesus comes through the front door and Satan comes in everywhere else. And so when we're trying to backdoor things, I think that goes to a level of unrighteousness and not fair and sporting. I mean, if we're gonna be fair and sporting, let's just walk through the front door.
And it's not a cheap bill either.
No,
I mean, 6,000, not even 6,000 kids will be, quote, benefited, right?
less than 1%.
Yep, at a cost of,
I think she said 5,000 today, but is it more?
So if the numbers are playing out right, I would just divide
5,200.
42 million by 8,000.
8,400.
And you have to subtract the 2.5 million.
That's the 8,400
Sorry about that,
instead of
guys.
8,000, because there's 400
So is
per
that including
student that hits the same, it hits the same
the
number.
program manager that we have to pay? Do we know how much they're gonna get maybe?
They get 2.5 million or 5%, whichever is less.
Total admin cost.
Yeah. Something like that. Now, I haven't
Which is a
got to
bargain
that part of the
compared to
first
my
sub,
tech high.
but
Which was what?
It's a bargain compared to my tech high. Because they're making 4.1 or 4.2, they get 25% is their commission.
Wow,
Kristen says she needs in.
I still think that's a lot of money.
So if we have, just for clarity, I just did simple math. If we have $40 million straight up, we will serve, the program will serve 4,762 students. That's rounding up from a 0.9. It just still, so, I do think, I think the first thing we need to address is that the infrastructure of this bill is inherently unconstitutional. So I would offer that, and we can debate that.
From multiple perspectives, and it's not just the fact that this is really two bills in one.
Yes, it is two bills in one, yeah.
So it is an omnibus bill, and that's unconstitutional. But beyond that, if you just think about some of the principles that you put forward, as soon as a homeschool student takes the money, either the bill is unconstitutional and they can't do that, or there's something in the bill that causes that student to now become a public school student. because the Constitution requires that we be a public school state.
Mhm.
And in fact, I think the solution to all of this is change the Constitution, but nobody wants to.
I tried that.
Yeah.
I said to John Johnson, I said, dude, the easiest way to get around this, change the Constitution.
Yeah,
Yeah, laughed it off.
yeah, nobody wants to do that. And I understand.
Well, the
why.
question is why? Like, if we think this is a good thing and that most people like it, why are we not going that route?
Well, and why wouldn't we take the steps that need to be done to do this righteously? Our Constitution needs amended. We need like very clear language in our Constitution. In order for this to play out the way the marketing company says it's going to play out, we need a constitutional amendment. And if the will of the people is behind this bill, the will of the people would be behind a constitutional amendment. So we can't say the will of the people is behind one and not behind the other. The dichotomy there doesn't play out,
Would we need
in
a
my opinion.
constitutional amendment to give people a tax break for choosing something other than public school? How?
I don't know.
Because,
I don't know how they would interpret a tax break, like a tax credit.
Like if you're at a different, if you are taxed at a different rate, then.
No, you can change the tax rate, but it is a constitutional provision that you have income tax.
Yes, so if we have income tax and you and I decide, hey, public school isn't working for our kids, we need to choose something else, we're gonna check this little box in our tax form, it says we're not using the government provided schools anymore, and so we can save our own tax dollars and use it toward what we need.
To me, in my mind, that was the ideal solution, was a tax credit. As I talk to families that I know that would love to homeschool, they're really excited about this, they're like, we can't cash flow it. We can't cash flow waiting for that tax to come back. And there's no way you're gonna start saying as an employer, I mean, you would have every trade organization in the world go off the roof in this if every employer had to classify, do you homeschool your kids or not, to know if I'm gonna have to take state taxes out of your check. I mean, that's not a reasonable ask of the market.
I think they could figure that out. There's a box and you just check it. Like, it's just everything else. If you have kids, how many kids do you have?
Well, I think from filing for taxes, I agree
Yeah.
with you, but then people say, hey, I can't cash flow that, I can't keep paying what I'm paying and then get that in my tax refund the following year. Cause honestly, I think in my
What's a
mindset.
tax refund?
But you know what I'm saying, I mean, because that's what the average person sees that, is, well, when I'm getting my taxes back that I've overpaid, you know, in March, well, how do I handle that, the 15 months that I'm paying those taxes in and I can't afford to homeschool my kids? I mean, there's no jump off point.
So, and while there's no
Is
jump off
She
point,
can't get in.
there, and that might be true. I think we could argue that maybe, you know, struggling for 18 months and then making certain that we're fiscally disciplined, that money comes back through your tax exemption and you expend it over the next year. And the idea that homeschooling costs $8,000 a year is almost just laughable, in my opinion. But that there are people that I know that say, hey, I homeschooled for $200 a year for years. You know, my family's done it. It wasn't anywhere near that. We might have spent $1,000 on our homeschool curriculum. So just that idea that if we struggle for 18 months or so maybe, then that money that comes back to us through a tax exemption, then we honor that and we're fiscally disciplined to ensure that we use that moving forward, because that refund should pay for your year of homeschooling plus the next year.
Well, and I think what's interesting is homeschooling has been done since the beginning and founding of this nation, and we've never needed government funds to do it.
Yeah.
So opt out. So I talked to a family today that has 7 kids. Every child was homeschooled up until 7th or 8th grade, and then they kind of got them hybrid going in, and then they went to UCAS for high school. Inside of that, I said, how much on average do you think you spent annually for homeschooling your kids? Their number was between 12 and 15,000. So that would have been,
Insane.
about
I've
$2.
never had that kind of money in my life, ever.
and that was them
I've never
saying,
had any access to that kind of money, ever, for my 4 children when homeschooling.
and that was this family going, we're trying to provide access to give a well-rounded education and things that they're not gonna get at public school. So, hey, kids, guess what? We're gonna go do the, Lehigh Arts Council play, which costs money. Hey, we're gonna go do this, that costs money. Hey, and that's what, in their world, that's what it added up to. You know, is 8,000 the right dollar amount? I don't know. In my letter to the legislature, to the education committee today, I actually said I think it should be less because we're gonna underfund a program already because you're only gonna let 6,000 kids in. Why don't we cut that number in half or cut it by a third or do something to increase the opportunity to other people? So from that point, I agree.
That amount is a choice, that's not a need. And so while they may have looked at their income and said, this is what it costs us because this is what we wanted to do and we can, then that's fine, they can choose that. I've homeschooled 4 kids and I never spent that kind of money on them.
And I was just giving that example.
Right,
of
right.
what,
And there's free
what they're-
curriculum out there too. There's all kinds of options. And we all have to look at our own budget and decide what we can afford. That's just life.
I think what's important is that we take the chunks of the bill. So like Christina did, she kind of took chunks. And we have to remember, I printed off a copy here, if I could find it, of all the other bills that are running more subversively along with the Utah Fits bill. So this is like a very clean version of the bill. These are the things that we want to start looking at. One of them was presented in committee today. I don't know. I don't understand in 118, but I've been tired of reading this big chunk of change here.
Well, and I think that goes back to righteous legislation goes through the front door. We don't parse it off into little bills and pretend that we've acted righteously. We come through the front door, we say, this is what we're doing, this is our intent, and if it's truly righteous, the people will come behind it. But the language, that's not in the bill. Well, it might not be in this one, but you've parsed it off over here. And to me, that's a little, I wouldn't say it's a little nefarious, I would say it is nefarious policymaking.
All right, for the benefit of everybody, we probably ought to go through this bill.
Verse by verse, line by line.
Well, why don't we just do the sections that you found last
Yeah.
night? And we'll just, and then let's like not interrupt unless ever somebody has like a question, like, cause they don't understand something.
Right.
We'll just go
Should
through
we just
it.
go page by page and see if anybody has a comment, and if not, go on to the next page?
Sure. I'm excited that we're live, I didn't even know that. My level of excitement that all of my thoughts are going to be nickeled and dimed by the general public. This is like so riveting to me that I just don't know if I can help myself.
All right. So what sections have you guys pulled up then?
The language really starts in section 4. I think that's where you're basically at.
It does start in section 4. I think, you know, people have used a lot of different language, but
What line item is it?
I would like to draw our attention to what is in the first draft of
Mine was
page 8,
261.
and I'm trying to find
Thank
it
you.
in
Can we go line number?
the second draft, 223 in the first draft.
Before we get there, does anybody have comments before line 223?
No, that's really the first change to
Yeah.
code.
Yeah.
Okay. There was, well, the addition of the Fitz Scholarship Program to a section of existing code that allows for cost adjustments based on inflation and growth. I initially had a concern, but I believe in the first sub today, I believe that is now removed.
Where it goes up with inflation and the COLA.
Well, I've got to find
It
it,
goes
because
with
I only scanned the first sub.
It's only 49 pages.
I can't believe you haven't memorized sub number 2.
Well, I tell you what, you've got to read these things.
My
There's-
level of disappointment with you is high right now. I just can't even, the fact that you have not memorized the first substitute of a 50-page bill is just, I can't believe it.
All right.
So if I were to start us, I would draw our attentions to line 239 in sub 1, 240, 241, and 242. I think, as a public school educator, I can only speak for myself, but there is a general feeling among educators that this is a bait and switch. You either value what we do in the classroom and you empower us to do it well and you pay us fairly for it, or you don't. But don't bribe us to support legislation. And I think that would be a fair thing to say, that there's a general feeling among your educators that, if there wasn't a temperature in this state that was hostile public discourse, the framing of this bill escalated the public discourse. Because your teachers don't say, hey, you care about me, you think we're awesome, you're gonna do this, but only if. I think if the intention was to say that we love teachers, it fell dead. It's dead. It was poorly executed, because I don't think your teachers feel loved by that language.
This is the governor right here. This is the governor's requirement.
Okay.
If he's going to support it, he wants the teachers to get this kind of a.
But if that's the case, why didn't they create another bill, like they said today?
Exactly.
But it was admitted to me by two representatives, well, I should say one representative, the other one was silent on the issue, and you were there, John, and by a senator, that it's good political strategy.
It's unconstitutional.
I digress.
But it gives us what we want.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I should
That's
say,
what the deal was.
it's highly likely unconstitutional.
It's not really ethical either.
That is,
not
it's
something
not
that-
ethical. No.
We should be very transparent about what we're doing when we write a bill, and it shouldn't have to be this long
Mhm.
if we're not throwing a whole bunch of other things into it. Pork is what they call it, right?
Yeah.
What is the next line that you're concerned with?
So I would offer that, so in draft 1, it's 233 and 234, but in draft 2 here, we've got some other stuff. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, it may have been pulled. I don't see the,
Are you looking at the comparison?
oh, no, I'm actually looking at 266, 267 is what I'm looking for. So it says, I'm looking for the language that says that in accordance with the Title 63G, blah, 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 the state board shall make rules to ensure LEAs. That's the language I'm looking for. Oh, here it is, 249 and 250. So, I think another thing that, again, I've been doing this 22 years, and
When you rattle off the numbers, the line numbers, are you referring to the original version or the sub?
oh, both, because you can track that. I'm glad you're laughing at me. I probably shouldn't make jokes on the interwebs. But I'm actually hopping between the two, because even though I've read sub 1, I haven't highlighted sub 1. So I'm looking at 249 and 250 in the first sub. And this, I call this placation language. And while it might be in here, teachers, it's just like there's a culture, and there's certain things that teachers know, and the legislature will do things, whether it be in Utah or other states, and we sit around the lunch table or wherever at, and we're like, we're never going to see that money. We kind of laugh, ha ha ha, it's a joke, right? And so what's interesting about here, it says that the state board shall make rules to ensure that LEAs do not reduce or artificially limit a teacher's salary to convert the salary supplement in this section into a windfall for the LEA, which is earmarking these funds, which I think sounds fantastic. What it doesn't earmark is what's already in place. So even though, and I'm gonna just kind of maybe like this, right? We'll just use my two phones, for example. Here is this teacher raise that we're passing. Nothing prevents your LEA from saying, well, we've got this money and we can't use it anywhere else. We're just gonna take this money and move it over here. So even though it says you know, they can't do that. There's not prohibitions against mobilizing other funds in other budget line items. And,
I think they're assuming that the word windfall will capture that. The LEA would,
it might, and maybe the board rule would.
And I think they're leaving it up to the board to do that. I actually asked about that specifically, and the intent was, and you'll have to correct me, Christine, if you know this better than I do, but a couple of years ago, the legislature gave a pay increase when we weren't flush with money. And then the districts, I think it was a 5% increase, and then the districts on average only gave a 2.5% increase, and they used that money for other means. And so their intent was, is if we say we're going to give a teacher this money, we want it to show up on their paycheck. That I'd ask that specifically, because I was like, what is this even meaning?
So it could be, and I'm asking questions. This whole bill reeks of, we don't trust the USBE. They're injuncting them left, right, and center, despite the fact that they're asking them to house this program under their umbrella. And ultimately, they have no other place to put it because the Constitution, right?
the Constitution.
So they're injuncting the USBE every which way but backward in this bill, or attempting to. And yet this line here says that the USBE has to rule on this. And while they can rule on it, at some point we have to say either we believe in local control or we don't.
What line was that?
249 and 250. And so I like how Steve said that they're trying to encapsulate that with the word windfall. I think that... oh, go ahead.
I have a quick question. This is a little confusing to me. So on 245, line 245, it says that the teacher has to have a satisfactory rating. So why in the same bill is it giving teachers more money? Because I homeschool my kids. So am I subject to that satisfactory rating also to receive that money? You know what I'm saying?
So
I know it's like, it doesn't make sense to me why it's teachers get more money. Also, we're going to give this money to homeschoolers in an HSA account. It should not be one bill to me.
it shouldn't, I agree.
You're not
So I don't know.
required, you're not required to get a satisfactory rating today.
Yeah.
Right.
That's coming in 2 years, honey. If past is prologue, 2 years, they'll require that of you.
Yeah, Gary.
I've seen what you're doing
I mean,
for PE. I think you're fine to get that satisfactory rating.
For PE. Yeah, we had basketball practice today. That was good. And a birthday party.
It's awesome.
So if we look at this, I think they either need to empower the USBE or be done. I don't know. And I realize we're dealing with two significantly different bills in the same bill, right? That's just the reality. But you turn the page and it reeks of distrust of the USBE, yet we're going to trust them to make this right? And I don't know. Maybe we can.
Well, in defense of the legislature, I can think of one particular board member that over and over and over on HB 374 has said, well, the legislature did not task us to do that, so we're not going to take any initiative to do anything on our own unless the legislature says that. And I think when I read that, because I agree with what you're saying, that's what I read in this bill is, well, we better make it pretty darn black and white because they don't do anything unless we tell them to.
Which is unfortunate.
But you have someone else that's representing the USBE now to the legislature, which is going to fix a lot of problems. I agree.
I'm smiling big, Joe.
And you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm smiling really big, Joe.
I'm proud of you.
I'm just picking on you. So I don't know. We can debate that. We can leave it alone. That is something that, like you said, a couple years ago, they gave 5, teachers saw an average of 2.5%. And there's nothing that limits districts from earmarking one and then pulling out of another bucket, or depending on how they do their funding. It just, to me, that's placation language, and I don't want to get caught up in that or mired down in the weeds of that. But I think that we need clear language that's actionable in a piece of legislation like this. And this bill is full of what I call placation language. We're going to placate the public. with some nice sounding language and then hope that it lands so we can say we said it.
Okay, next.
For me, I think the word windfall captures it. And in other words, if that bottom phone was pulled away from the teachers, then regardless of how they did it, the LEA experienced a windfall. And I think
Okay.
the word windfall is the key word in there.
I didn't realize that was a legal word. I'm not trying to be sarcastic or facetious, I just didn't realize it could be used in.
I'm just guessing what they want that word to mean, that they want all the money to go to the teacher.
Then hopefully the board can do a righteous job in writing the rule that would ensure that.
Yes,
I nominate you.
yes.
Nomination accepted. I'm on the finance committee.
So who's
Okay,
gonna,
let's keep going.
who's gonna write the actionable language for that? Who's going to submit it?
So hopefully if we come up, the way I personally believe the system should work, the committee would write it, they would run it through their own processes, and then put it forth to the full board for review, and then it would probably have 30-day public comment time. But more than likely, USBE staff will come up with some sort of draft. They'll push it up through the finance committee. The finance committee will amend it and or change it, and then it will get voted to be pushed to the full board for review, and then more amendments could happen there. And then once it's approved, I believe that once you pass a rule, there's a 30-day public comment period that goes after that. So we could see some of that interchange happen.
So you're not suggesting that we ask that be added to the bill?
I'm not clear on your question.
I was suggesting that we don't have to modify the bill. That was just me. I believe the word windfall captures it. But
Okay.
there's nothing that would prevent us from suggesting clearer language.
Okay.
So 249 to 250 sounds like there might be a need for some clearer language. Okay. Let's keep moving.
So this gets really confusing when they change a bill at the 10th hour.
Yes, it does.
Last time it was 6 times, right?
6 times, yep. So 289, I think if we're gonna include this language, there needs to be a clear definition of the word enrolled. Because many of the people asked today, and you know, it was a nice hearing. I don't want to deny that it was a nice hearing, but I think the dismissiveness of some of our legislators could have been found offensive to members of the public because they asked really good questions. You know, I'm concerned about this, and then it's always, well, that's not gonna happen, but if you don't define enrolled in line 289, there's gonna be lots of problems in this SGO or this program manager, right? There's gonna be lots of problems in this area if we don't define that word. And, you know, what does it mean to be enrolled? Are you enrolled if you play on the soccer team? Because there are many school districts who actually make you register and fill out appropriate paperwork. So are you enrolled if you register and then play on the soccer team? I think that there needs to be some delineation of that. And maybe that's in extant code, but I'm not aware of a definition of enrolled for the purposes of this kind of program. And if you're not able to access those funds, if you're enrolled in an LEA, one would assume that you should define that word. In my opinion.
You know the criteria. So the provider, do they create the criteria that the scholarship will be implemented per family, per child, per school? How is that done? Say for example, I was talking to somebody about this today. Say for example, parents want to go to Waterford, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go to Waterford because $8,000 is not going to cut it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can probably go to Judge Memorial
Or Juan Diego.
or Juan Diego, someplace like that.
let's say Juan Diego says, we will take the money, but you have to have a GPA above this to come over here because we want to maintain our standards, we want to bring somebody in who has a bad attitude, what have you, and bring everybody's attitude down because you come from the west side or you come from West High. Can this private school turn it down without being sued?
I think that's a great question. And I don't know that I have an answer to that. This bill leaves those issues untouched.
Because that creates another problem for the child that's coming from the other school. Now he's bullied because, for example, you go to Waterford, well, now that's not you, Juan Diego, for example, or some other school where there's not a lot of minorities, and they don't want you there. You create another problem for, and this is what the left will say. You create another problem for that child because he's been picked on, he's been bullied because you guys passed this bill, blah, 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 blah. And I wonder what are the future possibilities on that, problems on that.
So, I don't know. I have not dug into, and I always do two things with bills. I read it once, I read it twice, and then I go after it with colored things, right? So, I
had a similar question, but it was the opposite, and that's, what if you have a child that comes in and they're misbehaving at the school and they are causing disruptions, but they came in with a scholarship, and today there was somebody in the audience who said, oh yeah, the school can kick them out, but they just have to give the rest of the scholarship back to the program manager.
And that is outlined in the bill.
Yeah, so both need to be protected, both the student who is innocent and the private school who makes the rules and says, hey, we don't have bullying in this school, and so if you bully other kids, you get kicked out of our school. They should be able to keep that rule. They shouldn't have to change the rule, because now we are, and this is where the whole strings attached gets tricky.
It gets really tricky, yeah.
Because this year, it might not be an issue, but in 2 years, they may have had enough complaints. Hey, the rest of my family goes here. This child struggles with being a bully, but he needs to go to the same school as the other kids because I can't do two different. I mean, there's excuses for everything.
So I'm gonna have a conversation with some guys from legislators tomorrow.
Okay.
So I think
But
what needs to.
on that though, really quick, when we talk about that liability, there's already some precedent set in public ed because you do have public schools that you have to apply for, UCAS, for example, where, it's using public funds, you have to apply, you have to have a certain standard to get in. There's some precedents that, hey, if my brother's in, I'm gonna automatically get in. There's some precedents there that says, hey, if I misbehave, I'm out. I think a lot of that, whether there's case law behind that or it's just precedents, I think precedence is there. Whether there's the case law
But isn't that public school though, but not private? So
It is, but
private.
it's really kind of a similar scenario though, because if our concern is that Waterford can't get someone out now because there's public funds, UCAS I think would fall in that same category, that hey, public funds put you into the school, but your behavior or your performance pushed you out. I would think they'd be very similar categories, but I agree with your question.
And go back to the middle grouping because I don't think the SGO should be the one implementing the criteria.
Well, they're unelected. Let's
Exactly.
start with that. They are
They should not
unelected.
be the ones that are, legislature should be doing that, or school board, however you want to call it.
Hey, now.
No, except for Christina.
I think both must be protected. The private school has a right, they do have a right to terminate relationships with students that don't meet their standards. They also have a right to have application criteria. They also have a right as a private institution to assert and maintain a statement of faith in their hiring practices, in their infrastructure, in their rules and regulations, policies and procedures. And
I'm sure the legislature doesn't want to touch those criteria with the 10-foot pole.
well, and I think what we have to be concerned about is once you accept government funding, you're going to invoke all sorts of regulation that even if it's not written in the bill, and we can talk about some of that regulation that's invoked, later on, just by the fact that they require you to get an FEIN. You're gonna invoke a whole new series of code over here that's not mentioned here, and they're gonna say that's not in the bill. But by requiring that FEIN, you invoke a whole new series of code over here. And, and well, we don't care what you found. And for all you at home, I talk to my electronic devices. It's a syndrome. I need medication. But I just think we have to be very cognizant of, you know, there was a speaker today that called them unintended consequences, and that's good language. That when you put something here, you're going to create a storm over here, and we need to make certain that we prevent that at all costs, because we cease to be private when we engage government money. And that's the biggest issue.
Look how complex this bill is already.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yes.
just getting started.
Yeah,
Okay, we have to come up with a plan to move through this bill.
a plan to move through this bill. Would you like me to just take the lead?
Yes,
Is that what I'm hearing?
Sure.
That's
Well,
great.
I'm looking around the table. I bet Steve could do it too.
Go, no, you
He's,
do it.
he's super exciting.
I think Steve's taking some
So
good notes.
I want to honor just some people here. I think, first of all, if we're looking at what is in sub one is 294 to a 299 maybe at or about, I suppose that whoever wrote this probably was well intended, but as a person who homeschools, I find it offensive. I find the language offensive.
Told you,
And
James Lindsay.
and I think that I think we're looking at a conversation here where you know, you can be well intended and it still won't land. And this bill has offended educators across this state. It's offended the homeschool community. And this language, out of program homeschool student, why not just affidavit homeschool student? Why not traditional homeschool student with affidavit on file? Why out of program? It just almost seems like, well, maybe we'll come back one day and amend this to out of compliance.
Yeah, independent or self-reliant or
Yeah,
traditional.
self-reliant homeschool student, I would love that. And that might be semantics, but if this bill genuinely does not affect traditional affidavit homeschoolers, why mention it at all?
I agree.
And I'm asking a question, if it genuinely will never affect traditional homeschoolers that have filed an affidavit in this state, why even bring it up in this piece of
And
code?
it may be to distinguish the two,
Mhm.
but,
That's what they said today.
but it was also made clear that you're not technically a homeschool student.
Yes, that was made very clear at
If
the
you partake of this money.
Mhm.
And so why do we have to distinguish it? Homeschool families are the ones that are not taking the money, and scholarship recipients, although I hate the word scholarship too. Honestly, scholarship to me sounds like something you earned,
Yes,
not something that's just given to you because you're a child and
I agree,
and you fall into these qualifications.
I agree.
So,
If we move down, I'm sorry, I should have let the conversation die a little more.
No, you're fine.
No, it's
Okay.
fine.
We've got to
So-
move.
So if we move down a little bit, we've got some language here,
Which
and
one?
I'm looking at her about, I'm trying to find it in the new code. I'm looking for the words harvest data.
It's 303.
303. Awesome, thank you for that. So this bothers me, and I'll tell you why. It bothers me because it should say, doesn't harvest data. Period. The program manager doesn't harvest data, period. But by the qualifier that comes after that, you know, you have your preposition for the purposes of reproducing or distributing the data to other entities. Doesn't harvest data,
Period.
period.
But as a program manager, aren't they required to collect and track data? Okay, Joe's in the program and he gets to spend $8,000. I'm going to need to track that he's spent $7,000, he's got $1,000 left. I have to, as a program manager, I have to harvest data. But I shouldn't be
Or maybe-
reproducing or sharing or doing anything like that. But that's what I'm tasked to do, is take that data, and manage at expenses. I mean, that'd be like,
Well, maybe then we
Specify-
expand the line, we put, does not harvest data, period, except for tracking expenses, enrollment numbers, de-identified data, but this harvest data to me it just causes me concern
but
that there's not an injunction.
But I think they are saying that you don't harvest data to reproduce or distribute the data to other entities. I think that's exactly what you're saying, isn't it?
I would just rather they not harvest data at all. And maybe I understand how much data is inside the education system. So when I see the words harvest data and there's a qualifier on it, I go, no, we just don't harvest data, period.
Would it be better to say that they may not share data with it?
So there's some, later on in the suggested language, there are some things that talk about how and why they can share, but they invoke some federal code. And at this point in history, FERPA's almost worthless. I mean,
So, yeah, why are we letting federal code rule over this? I mean, it's probably
it goes back to the
legal, right?
Constitution.
Yeah.
This is public
Okay.
money in a public education program.
Yeah.
We might not like it, but it is.
So until we get out from underneath the fence,
Yeah.
they're gonna be included in this too.
Yes. So, again, maybe it's something to debate. What do you think, Steve?
The way that they have it, worded, I'm okay with it, because it does narrow it, it defines it properly in my mind. I agree that it would be better if there was a period after data, but they do need to harvest data for their own internal purposes.
Yeah.
Their own internal
I would like to
financial-
know exactly what they're harvesting, though.
I mean, if I were to add something to your point, I would put in for reproducing, distributing, or aggregating the data in any other way. Because I think that's where data harvesting is what they're looking for, is aggregated data. And so if you specifically say you cannot aggregate the data and share it, I think to your point, it becomes a lot more clear.
Yeah, maybe that's a good word to add. Would you like me to write that down?
That's on 303.
That's what I have. It's on, yeah.
Hey, you guys. James Lindsay has joined us. I wanted him to come and maybe talk a little bit about public-private partnerships and the danger that it holds. He's been
Yeah.
speaking to a lot of legislators about that, and I know it's kind of late his time. So can he maybe interject for a
course,
second
yeah.
and have a chance to speak?
I will not let James Lindsay interrupt me, Lisa.
Would he also like to join the next committee hearing?
Yes. Would you like to join the next committee hearing, James? Is he laughing at my bad jokes or?
Laughing at something. I'm open to it. Yeah, I'm not gonna commit to anything until I know what I'm signing up for, but
Of course.
it depends on what the committee hearing's about, and possibly, if I'm available, I would love to be of help for certain. I'll give you that much. So let's be in touch about it and figure it out, and if it's something that I have something worth saying, and I'll be happy to come if I can.
Thank you.
So
Yes, amen, amen.
I'm not 100% sure what you got. I actually was doing another one of these in Arizona for the last 2 hours and change. So for the group in Arizona just now that started at the same time you guys did, so I know you guys are slogging through it. I don't know what you discussed, and I don't know what exactly you want me to say. So if you might kind of direct me just a little bit. I know it's the public-private partnership and its intersection with the school choice issue. It was asked, Lisa asked if I would come and make some commentary about, but a little clarification before I run my mouth might be helpful.
Okay, so James, maybe just run us through the 3P relationship as it relates to the captured system. I want to give you as much latitude and breadth as possible, so is that broad enough?
Yeah, okay, so I'll just talk kind of very generally and then go try to enjoy the rest of my evening. The issues, there are a handful of issues with school choice as kind of just a solution to the problem, if you will. It's really the woke problem. There are a handful of issues, but there are two that are kind of really pertinent to the public-private partnership model that we currently enjoy. And I say enjoy with all due hesitation because it's tyranny. The public-private partnership, I think the best expression, if to understand how it works, is something that Vivek Ramaswamy says in lots of his talks, and I think it's all of his books or whatever, which is that which they cannot accomplish through the front door of government, they will accomplish through the back door of corporations. And so when you have a public-private partnership, there is a belief that there's frequently a belief that we have a market that does not exist. The premise behind school choice is that if we open up a market for education, the forces of the market, the competition within the market would force all schools to improve, whether it's the new schools that are accessing money, whether it's the existing schools, public, private, or whatever, charter, that now have to compete with a broader range of competitors, and some of which ideally will be quite good. The idea is that added competition is going to create pressure that will improve the schools. And it may, in fact, improve them, but the question on the table isn't necessarily just that. It's will it create a circumstance that avoids the problem, which is whether it's through this data mining or through the social emotional learning of building out social credit scores for students, building out kind of the new economy around the students that they're trying to plug into the new economy through the so-called 21st century education or School 4.0 or whatever brand name they slapped on it. And the answer to that seems likely to be no. The advantage in a market that has, like I just spoke in Arizona, that has kind of universal ESAs, the biggest advantage is going to be to large entities that are going to create something like franchises of schools that will distribute throughout the states for the obvious reasons. They save costs through scaling. They have access to greater technology to integrate digital and in-person instruction. They have more capital to leverage to get physical infrastructure or whatever. And at this point, there's no reason to believe that a large corporate entity is not going to be fully ESG or SDG compliant, because how are they going to get the capital if they're not? How are they going to stay in business if they're not? How are they going to get approved for things if they're not? And so in that case, that means they're going to be doing many of the same things, but with different methods. So your kid might actually end up getting a better quality education. They might avoid gender ideology or whatever it happens to be, some specific, but at the same time, the data mining and the building out of the kind of competency portfolio continues apace. It in fact, doesn't change at all. And therefore, you give people the ability to believe that they've stepped out of the problem when, in fact, they haven't stepped out of the problem. They've jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, as the old saying goes, but they're still getting cooked. The second thing to talk about with that is that, actually, before I go to the second thing, with the public-private partnership, though, what you have to understand is that there's not actually a market. The public sector and the private sector are one sector. And so the logic that a market's going to solve a problem doesn't operate the way as when the public sector and private sector are more separated, when they're operating in concert with one another. And we just saw it. The FBI director is at Davos on stage with no shame in his voice, explained that they are explicitly and intentionally working with the tech companies to do all kinds of things, almost proudly. And so this is an issue. The market doesn't work the way that the market should work. We have the SEC making ESG recommendations. We have the corporations, the banks under ESG recommendations. The public and private sector are shaking hands. And that's not a situation where regular market rules apply. And in fact, whether it's ESG or SDG, it's being operated largely as a cartel. And so the house rules will be applicable to both halves of the new kind of unisector. I think in reality, we live with one foot in each world. We still kind of have a market and still kind of don't. which makes things a little more complicated, and there will be some market pressure. But again, I think that what we'll find is that large franchise models are going to dominate. But all of that ends up being moot, period, with this, what I was referencing before, which is actually the competency-based model. If they move into a competency-based model, the way that I've read that it's framed out so far, to my understanding and my interpretation of it, it looks very much like collecting merit badges in competencies. And those will determine your employability under a truly scary system. Should it progress to that, they would determine your citizenship rights, privileges, really. So are you, if there's such a competency in whether it's under brand name, something like social awareness under the Castle model, or whether it's more specific and it's like LGBTQ awareness or ally or whatever, advocate, whatever their other words are that they happen to use. If that's a thing that's required, if you have something that's the equivalent of a corporate equality index score for your individual kid, it doesn't matter what school they go to, they're going to have to get the score up. So rather than seeing how math competent they are, you're going to have to figure out, the kids are going to be assigned scores or competency ranges that, or badges or whatever that track around in their digital wallets that are attached to their digital ID that determine whether or not they can go to college. If you don't have a equality index of 100, you can't go to anything except community college or whatever it happens to be. And so when that's the case, it won't matter what kind of school they go to at all. Every school is going to have to do this. So there's a second problem, and the reason that that's relevant to the public-private partnership model is that's what public-private partnerships are building. That's not specifically a public-private partnership issue, but that's what they're building, and that's what they're facilitating, and that's what you guys, it just happened that I come in when you're discussing data harvesting. That's what the data harvesting is largely relevant to, is to be able to build that kind of a thing. They have to know where your kid stands on XYZ social issues through relentless surveying and mapping or whatever. And you'll notice that in a real market, by the way, none of this is how it works. Your employer doesn't know what your math scores are. They don't know how math competent you are. You show up and you show if you can do the job, and you have some various proxies like degrees or whatever that's certified in past classes like calculus. But you don't have this kind of digital wallet with a bunch of competency in it that tell what you can do and not do. Ultimately, though, the big concern that we have to be paying attention to with the school choice issue in general is whether or not the private sector is going to create basically what looks essentially like the university model that we have now. You already have school choice at universities, and look how woke they all are. Does that solve the problem? No. You have to ask why. Can you find a university that's not woke? Hillsdale. And I stop there, and I get in trouble for this. I'm in a huge ongoing argument with literally the VPs of Liberty University because I won't add them to the list because I have a DEI office. And so we have full-blown school choice at university level. You have you pick your school. Every kid picks their school. Does it solve the problem? No, it doesn't. And why? It's because it doesn't matter if the school's public or private. It doesn't matter. They're all doing the same thing. And so that's a out of the frying pan into the fire kind of issue. And if you're not thinking about the issue that way, the fear with school choice is that it creates a sense that you've avoided the problem, especially by giving kids access to schools that avoid kind of the most acute issues. You could actually financially break the public schools, which I know many conservatives are excited about, but that creates its own nest of problems. And meanwhile, you're taking public money in one way, or you're making taxpayers pay money that go in, that then go back to them into ESAs or whatever, that they're then spending on corporations that we have no reason to believe at this point have anybody's best interest in mind. I compare it a lot to the Walmart issue coming from East Tennessee, where Walmart moves into a town and then there's no other stores but Walmart because of the various things that they do. And right now, the deal, again, kind of a bad analogy, is that it's not crushing all the other businesses because the rules under, say, access to these ESAs is usually through special needs or whatever, is that only people in wheelchairs are allowed to shop at Walmart, so it can't do any of the things that it does to destroy all the rest of the market. But I suspect that what we're going to see is that well-laid plans for corporate models that do the same thing, where you have less recourse, are probably going to overwhelm the entire model of school, the whole system of schooling, once the floodgates are opened for that public money to be redirected through these savings accounts or tax credits or whatever the method happens to be in Utah. I wasn't here for that part of the meeting. To where the options appear to increase but don't increase. The two options, public and private, that you end up with turn out to be doing the same thing anyway. This doesn't give any good advice for what to do with a specific school choice bill, unfortunately. Because the conclusion of my actual concerns is that the school choice discussion is at present a distraction. And that nobody likes to hear that. I am a huge advocate for the idea of educational freedom, that the parents should be able to direct the dollars however they want. I'm almost to the point now where I don't even think there should be education taxation at all, and everybody should just be able to buy schooling for their kids however they feel like it. I'm almost gone full libertarian on this because I'm so frustrated with how bad the schools are, but that's beside the point. I think that what we're doing in general around the country is missing that there is a bigger problem that prevents what appears to be a solution from being a solution. And until we tackle the bigger problem, what we're doing is setting ourselves up to not necessarily fall into an irrevocable trap, but to fall into a situation where we feel like we have avoided we've set ourselves up to avoid the problem, but in fact, all we've done is give them enough time in our complacency to lock us into the system that they need. I don't know if that makes sense, but we're not going to get around the big picture capture of schools. Now, I saw the chat that this bill prohibits the mining of data, and I saw that actually it's right there, 303C, does not harvest data for the purpose of, I see this in the discussion about why and what it's for and what it can be done. I don't know the details of what that means. I don't know whether these corporations will be able to harvest the data. I don't know if a lot of this stuff's done through third parties. If the program that you have installed doesn't harvest the data, but the Chromebook they do it on harvests it anyway, and then they sell it, you still got the data harvesting problem going on. The data that's being harvested is very, very concerning, though. The SEL competency measures, if that's how the model develops, will require you to know whether or not the child is LGBTQ compliant, because that's how they're going to determine whether or not you've got the competency. And so I am broadly concerned that school choice doesn't truly exist under a public-private partnership. And the reason, I've rambled a bit, I'm sorry, I'm very tired, but the reason is that the corporate sector and which will dominate private schooling. There will be some small schools, micro schools, homeschooling, et cetera, but they will dominate private schooling or alternative schooling or whatever it gets called. And then the public sector are going to be doing roughly identical things, different window dressing, same house, if you will. So it makes me concerned that what we're going to do is say, to the average person in the public, drink your soup, it'll make you feel better. And then what's actually going to happen is that they're sitting still when they should be clamoring against a big picture trap where the public and private sectors are working together. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but Lisa asked if I would come and make those remarks. And I don't know if that answers the question that Lisa wanted me to address.
Yeah, thank you so much, James, for joining. Hopefully that was helpful for everybody.
These are just my concerns.
Thank you, James.
Thank you
But
so
I don't
much.
think it's good choice. I just, you know what I mean. All right. Well, thank you all. And if I can make it to a committee meeting and it's helpful for you or whatever it was at the commission, whatever you ask, be in touch. I will be happy to come help further. And I can't wait to get back out to your fine state when I get a chance.
All right, James.
All right, just drop your number in the chat. We'll get in touch.
All right. Cheers, y'all.
Cheers.
Thank you.
I
was
shouldn't
nice
joke
of-
so much, people are gonna think I'm serious.
That's nice of him to come on.
And it's very nice.
Thank
She
you,
came
Lisa.
through for me. I said, hey, can you get him on?
Hey, Lisa, thank you. Are you still there? Oh, maybe she dropped off to talk to him.
Yeah,
All right,
maybe.
go ahead, Christina.
Okay, so I would draw our attention to line number 344.
Okay.
And this line has actually caused some consternation, and I was called some nasty names today because of it. But it says up in line 333, you go back up to the parent line, scholarship expense means an expense described in section 53F-6-402 that a parent or scholarship student incurs in the education of the scholarship student for a service or good that a qualifying provider provides, including, and we skip down to 344 and it says supplies or other equipment related to the scholarship student's educational needs.
Where is she?
So
Oh.
if your child is in piano and you just so happen to not have a piano,
It's right there.
this would buy you a piano, which is a is real property. It's personal property that can then be resold. Let's say your son is taking a woodworking class, but you're a homeschooler and you need a table saw. This line allows for the purpose of that table saw to teach and homeschool your child how to create woodworking projects. And I just so happened to say earlier today that if you are a family and you got 3 babies and your car broke down and your kid needs to take driver's ed, well, by darn, the way this is written, you don't have a vehicle for your child to participate in driver's ed, and the way this is written, it is an educational tool needed, and the language up here says that an expense incurred in the education of a scholarship student for a service or good that the qualifying provider provides. So, when we start talking about real property and personal property that can be purchased, it could be a saxophone. And I don't know if you've purchased a saxophone lately, but those things are not cheap. Even if you buy them used, they're $700-800. Trumpets run around $1,100 used for a decent one that's not going to sound like a strangled duck. So you've got this line here, and you've got no qualifiers on it. And to me, when the government goes to purchasing real property through an entitlement program, I take issue with that. And I was called some nasty names when I brought it up, but this line I think should be concerning to taxpayers. I think it should be concerning to the bill sponsors and the people drafting this bill, because it opens the door for real property purchases that can be resold. So now we're not talking about just the service of education, we're talking about property involved in education, and then the government can buy that property and then you can resell it because, well, it's yours.
I would like to add that that is inaccurate. That is not hyperbole. My son, we had to buy him a guitar for Christmas because all of his friends got guitars and keyboards and laptops and field trips and things that we could not afford.
Mm-hmm.
We had to save up for it for a year to be able to purchase that for him so he could take lessons. Luckily, we have YouTube now, so he self-learned. But that is not hyperbole. Every one of the friends bought things like that.
But what it's saying here, you just have to read the language. So it says a qualifying provider provides. So if I'm a piano supplier, I'm probably not a qualified provider. Or if I am a piano supplier who gives piano lessons, and that's my choice to say, hey, my music experience for my child is taking piano lessons, I would assume that provider is going to have a list of things they can provide, and that's probably a 30-minute piano lesson once a week, not a baby grant.
So
Well,
that
but
comes
they
under
got-
a different line item. We're actually in
Yeah.
that would be the service provider is providing the service. This is a scholarship expense under line 333.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the old bill, but it says it's for a student for a service or good the qualified provider provides.
Mm-hmm. So it's an expense that is incurred. So in order to take piano class, we need a piano. In order to take band, we need a saxophone. In order to learn to woodwork, we need a saw. We're talking about the purchase of real property then that becomes.
I agree, based on it coming from a qualified provider. I mean, that doesn't mean
That's,
that I can
yeah,
go
that is
out-
what it says here.
It doesn't mean I can go out.
'Cause it
to
all
the
is all
marketplace
together.
and say, well, I'm gonna go find $8,000 of stuff, so I can go take it to a pawn shop.
So as I read this, it's the expense incurred as a student partakes in the service from a qualifying provider. That's how I read that.
Okay, so that's
So-
something we need clarification on.
I think we
think
need
it is.
clarification on it, and I think it needs to be narrowed. I think the scope needs to be narrowed, that real property cannot be purchased. And, I think we get into really murky waters there when we say that real property is the property of the program.
Well,
But
if you're a homeschooler and you buy curriculum, is that real property then?
I would call it real property, but that's in a different line item. This is supplies or other equipment.
Okay.
And
Key word is
as I
equipment.
read this bill, this is something that in later sections, a parent could purchase and submit for reimbursement for. Which,
And-
please, you're nodding, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because this line really, struck me as, consternation. There's a dichotomy that you cogitate it and you just never get a better feeling about it. Go ahead,
I
Steve.
think you could define lines 333 to 335 the way that you are, Christina. I can also understand why he would define them the way that he is. So it's not clear. In other words, the service provided by the qualified provider is piano lessons. So maybe there is a qualified provider that has been approved, and that qualified provider provides piano lessons. But in order to be able to practice at home, I still need to buy the piano. And I can see that falling into this category, the way it's
Well, and
currently
if the
written.
qualified provider also sells pianos, could they provide a piano for people to buy?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Would that be allowed or would it not be?
It's too open for interpretation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just way too open for interpretation. It
Well, and
needs to
it's
be-
open to
Like-
fraud and ripe for
That's a
corruption.
good catch.
It's more defined, is what we're saying.
Yeah, narrow the scope, in many ways. There were some things that I caught, if I just am gonna jump back, because this is not a big issue to find in the second draft, but it was clarified again today at the hearing, but the marketing company keeps saying, this starts next year, this is gonna be next year. It's not next year. It is absolutely not next
What
year.
line
It's
item
very
are you on?
clear in the bill language. It was articulated and clarified repeatedly during the hearing today. This does not start next year. This starts in the next fiscal after. So we're in fiscal 22-23. We will, dare I say, do a furlough of services. That's a bad word for what I'm trying to say, for 23-24. Should this be enacted by the legislature, the very earliest it could start is 24-25. And so this is not next school year.
That makes sense, because the program manager can't even, or they have to have a program manager set up by October 1st this
Mhm.
coming year. or
Well,
this year.
and there's some things in here that really conflict with just basic common sense of the USBE, and it was articulated well in today's USBE meeting. So Angie Stallings, I believe, articulated it. You can go back and look at that recording, but the average rule making process takes at or about 6 months, if not more. And this is pretty arduous rulemaking, this bill, and it's not the only bill we're going to rule on. And so, if it takes an average of 6 months, legislative session ends in March, we meet in February, we have something, we're looking at, before we can even throw out the RFP for people to bid on those contracts, we have to have the rules done, so we know what we're telling them our expectations are, right?
Right.
And so we've got some logistical issues here in this bill language that I would just say the marketing company is really misleading parents in saying next year. But then I would also say that this bill language really puts the USBE on a time crunch. And if we want the USBE to be effective, we need to give them time to do their job correctly and well.
It says that it's for the 2024-2025 school year,
Yes.
and that the program manager needs to be in place by March 1.
What line number is that?
So I thought it gave us an October 1st deadline.
I thought I saw October 1st also.
So is it changed
think
in the
that's
new
on the
draft?
So-
March 1, 2024.
So maybe we are seeing a little bit of push. Is that,
Lines 380, and then 391, 392.
oh, so we did see change. Well, I'm glad I brought that up because that's a
Yeah.
great catch.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the March 1, 2024 date used to be June 1, so they pulled it up 3 months.
Oh, they pulled it forward,
I
not
think-
back.
I think my guess is in doing that, because I have one of my notes here going, oh, you're gonna start in August 2025, but I can't even apply for the program until July 1st of 2024, so. that
They want to
program-
create a waiting list, is from what I've heard.
It sounds to me like they're trying to create an application period.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
pushing it forward, which I think, if it were enacted, I think that's smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I think that gives everyone time to react, because you got pulling kids out of elementary schools that have already been assigned to a class on July 1.
In lawsuits.
Lines
Huge problem for
363
schools.
and 374.
I don't know where, I don't know what I saw.
I have to look at this language because they've
I saw
I
they've
think it's
replaced that
later
language
on,
there.
when it's defining the program manager, I think that's like.
Yeah, there is an October date in there.
There is still. I think we just need to be fair and sporting. And the rulemaking on this bill alone is pretty extensive. And not only is it extensive rulemaking, there's an RFP process, and I quite frankly think that if we're gonna put people, staring down the barrel of a gun with a timeline, we should at least give them a reasonable timeline. And we know that even if we're dissatisfied with the USBE, which it appears that this bill language would indicate that they are dissatisfied with the USBE, we still should go, okay, it takes them an average of 6 to 8 months to complete the process on X. This is extensive rulemaking, and I think we need to be fair and sporting with our other agencies and our sister agencies
Yep.
to ensure that they can do their job righteously and well. So there's a little bit of a language change if you go up. It was interesting language.
What line?
347 and 48 in draft 1. I'm looking at it in draft 2, and it's got some language change, and so I'm going to have to research that. But I found that language in line 367 of sub 1 just super interesting, because they say that there's no restrictions on curriculum, yet in draft 1 it says the program manager approves subject to the restriction on guiding and directing curriculum. And so it's just some language that I go, there's no restrictions, but it's subject to the restriction, and I know it's the restriction on guiding and directing, but it's still just interesting language that doesn't flesh out in a logical way. If I were to take us to, and maybe someone can help me find the new lines in the new set of code, it's 388 to 390 in the old draft. And if I'm looking here,
It's 382.
382 in the new one.
Oh, no, that's wrong.
Yeah, I had highlighted this one as well, but I don't know for a reason.
So they move stuff, and it's section 6, just right under,
Go down.
no, it's 4, 3.
A little bit more, okay, so.
Oh, it's 417 it looks like.
Upon agreeing to establish scholarship students, including the balance of any expense.
No, I think I'm wrong. It's an application. So in the old draft at 388,
Yeah, it's 404.
it's 404.
An application for a scholarship.
Yeah, so this is just some interesting language. So it says an application for a scholarship account shall contain an acknowledgement by the student's parent that the qualifying provider selected by the parent for the student's enrollment or engagement is capable of providing education services for the student. And what I wrote down is not a realistic expectation. So you've got a twofold problem here. If you're a person who the government is going to pay for your private instruction, right? Then you have to check a box that says, hey, I got money coming to this institution in the form of this scholarship. Here's my application and my application fee. I want to be accepted as a scholarship student. But you can't get the scholarship without the acceptance. And so you've got two things kind of colliding together here, where you can't get the scholarship without somebody saying, hey, yeah, I've been accepted to this school, but most often you're not going to be able to accept be accepted to a private institution until such time that you've been able to secure the way you're gonna fund that, whether you pony up, like a monthly, withdrawal from your bank account, or you've set up a payment plan. Some
Which is
people
kind of
pay-
what we were talking about with the write-up, like people can't wait those 18 months,
Mhm.
12 months or whatever.
Yeah, so you've just got something that's gonna, the fists are gonna start bumping this way because one expects one and the other expects the other. And I think this is an expectation of the the program manager, right? But this is out of line with industry standard in terms of being accepted to a private school.
I think you're reading that wrong, because this is an application that when I go in to apply for the program, these are things that the program manager has to receive from me for me to have a qualified application. One of those is an acknowledgement to saying, I understand that by doing this program, there's qualified providers here. I've researched it, I know I can get what I need. I'm not gonna come back and sue the state because I should have stayed in public ed, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. Cause you follow it through, you look at, that's the qualification of 4A. If you go back up to 3A, it says a program manager shall establish a scholarship account. I mean, it's giving things that the program manager has to do in the application process to ensure that you have a qualified application. I don't think that that's necessarily anything other than giving instructions to the program.
But it tells me that the parent has to acknowledge that they are enrolled.
No,
Well-
it needs to acknowledge that the service provider that they're interested in is capable of providing the services that I want.
I highlighted this also saying, how do I know what the service provider has if I haven't had a chance to go in, for example, and review the curriculum?
So
If
there's
I-
more than one service provider?
Yes, there's gonna be a laundry list, like right now with my tech high, my understanding is you go into a database and there's like 30 different curriculums that you can choose from. So my question inside of this that I had to your point was, how do I acknowledge in the application process that I'm gonna like one of those curriculums? Are they gonna be open and available? I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but I don't know that that's really a catch-22 like you're seeing. But I see the catch-22 scenario there.
Yeah. And so I think we just need some clarity there. And also I think we need to acknowledge that our private institutions can have an application process as they see fit. And if they require acceptance first, and I know you don't read it that way.
Well, but go into the heading, so if you go right up to the section of code, it's the scholarship account application, program information. I mean, this is when I apply to the program. This isn't me applying to a private school or anything else, this is me applying to the program. That's what
When
this
you apply
section
to the
code.
program, when do you have to do that? Like what time of year do you do that?
It doesn't define that.
Because how do you know if you're gonna get into the school?
I think that's why those dates that we were just talking about are so important, because my guess is that's why they move those dates forward, so that.
Because usually you have to put a deposit down for a private school, April or May at the latest, because they start to fill up.
So maybe that's what it means then when it says, I will assume full financial responsibility for the education of my scholarship recipient. I don't know, maybe not.
Well, whoever drafted this, just to me, and I could be wrong, maybe they are super versed on the infrastructure of applications and private school admissions, but it seems to me like they're missing many vital pieces, especially if this money is going into private
I don't see this
institutions.
as an application process to private school, this is an application process to the
To
scholarship.
To Utah Fits.
Well, and I see that part, but what my concern is the part where it says that they must acknowledge that the qualifying provider selected by the parent students is capable of providing the education services for the student. That to me is a letter of acceptance. That to me is an assertion that they're gonna be able to go where they're applying to go.
I just don't read
It's
it.
an acknowledgement by the parent, right? It's an acknowledgement by the parent that the qualifying provider can provide the services required.
Because you keep going through that and saying, okay, not only am I saying, I reviewed that list of providers and I like curriculum number 14, I feel like that's gonna fit my needs, but now it's, I acknowledge that, the qualifying provider may not give the same level of disability services that are provided. I mean,
That's
this is
what I
the
was
list
looking
of,
at.
this is the list of contract stuff, so the state doesn't get sued.
But wasn't the
Or
whole
the
thing
program manager doesn't get
today
sued.
when all these parents were on there saying, I have these kids with disabilities, and they're saying, I need this for the disability, but then it's also saying a qualifying provider may not provide the same level of disability services that are provided.
So what does that mean? They have to be sub or above public?
I think that's just legal speak.
Well, but still, it's in there for a reason though. What's the purpose of it? I mean, why can't it be on par for this city? I mean, with the public.
Because I mean, there were so many parents that
There
testified that
was.
had children
There
that had
was.
disabilities today. And primarily, a lot of the parents that were for this were because they had a child with a disability.
Yep, sure was.
For most of them.
Well, and unfortunately, I think that's the world of attorneys, and it's not saying the qualifying provider shall not provide the same level, it says may not provide. That I'm assuming as a parent, I'm assuming the risk when I pull my child out of SPED in public school because I think I can provide better, and then it's not better, that risk, that burden is on me as a parent, not on the state or
Not
on the
on the
system.
school.
I mean, that's the way I
I
read
think that
that
would be, I kind of just feel like it's a little bit of an omission that should be clarified to parents, because I had a child with learning disabilities, so I would be pretty upset if it was marketed to me that you get to have this because there's no other place. How many people got online today and said, I just don't have a place for my kid because they have a disability? And then I pull my kid out and say, now I'm gonna be able to get this
But I
fixed.
think that's the process of pulling your kid out, and you're saying, hey, I need to go do my homework and make sure that I
Well, it
acknowledge.
does
I understand,
tutoring,
I'm just saying,
So that's
yeah.
probably, you know, if you could take them to a tutor that specializes in dyslexia, then it would cover that, I guess, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I see what you're saying,
Yeah,
but I think that's why that's in there, I think that's just legal speak that we all love.
okay.
Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's
I
go.
agree. So I do think that there's, there's something in here that is in every scholarship program. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's right here on line 421 in the new draft. And it says, agreeing to a scholarship account, regardless, and let's back up. I wanna back up. There are, for everybody listening, there were a number of people that testified today, we need this because our kid has a disability. We need this because my kid has autism, there's no place for them to go. There are scholarships for students with special needs in this state already in place. There's no reason these parents should not be using those. There was a $1.5 million surplus in one of those programs. And the Carson Smith, I haven't done a lot of research on that, but the Carson Smith program is there for students on IEPs and kids with like ADHD and autism. So the testimony was a little bit inflammatory because they were saying they needed something that already is available to them in this state.
Which I will add to, which is why we have 15 different school choice options in the state of Utah that currently exist.
Yes. So, and then moving forward just a little bit, I like
That was
how
told to me
Steve,
by a legislator.
So, I just wanna make sure I'm understanding, I mean, today was all public comment, that was people that had signed up, that wasn't testimony from the
Yes,
House that asked
public
people to
comment.
testify.
public comment,
Yeah.
yes, you are,
Okay.
that you are correct, I apologize.
So, I mean, that's just the litmus test of people that got there first that signed up, that's not saying, oh, this is who we're gonna service, that's
That was
just
your
the
understanding.
people that chose to speak.
Yes, yeah, that would be true. If we look in the new draft at
But the
4,
sponsor of the bill didn't clarify it.
True.
true, thank you for that.
Carry on.
No, I just,
Sorry.
I know that you want us to move, and this is, again, I know this is in every scholarship plan, you go to apply, and it says a scholarship should contain the following statement. This is, you see this on Carson Smith, you see this on, the other program in our state, and it says, agreeing to establish a scholarship account has the same effect as parental refusal to consent to services as described in these federal codes. And to some people, they might not fully understand what that means. But as an educator, the implications of that are huge. And while I understand this is like par for the course, right? I think that if we're gonna do something like this, we owe our parents informed consent. Informed consent. I understand, you know, if we're gonna have a statement that must be included, we need to extrapolate that out, that they genuinely understand what parental refusal to consent to services really means in that context.
What does it mean?
Well, it means.
Just very briefly.
Very briefly, let's just say, for example, and I'm gonna give you a random example that's totally made up. Let's say we have a 10-year-old student and they've got ADHD, had a diagnosis of dyslexia, and then we've maybe got a lower IQ, let's say 73 to 75. So we've got a kid who's got multiple diagnoses and issues in their learning processes. And if you refuse to consent to services, so 73, an IQ of 73 is like a threshold in public ed where you can come down under and receive like life skills training, and 70 is like a special number, right? Unless it's changed since last I read all the rules. But if you refuse to consent to services, then your child literally doesn't really get what they need to function and thrive in their learning process. Parents can deny that. So like, let's say pull-out resource might be one of those services. Let's say speech therapy is one of those services. Let's say reading intervention, which would result in pull-out from the classroom, might be one of those services that's offered under these codes and IDEA in particular. And so refusing to consent to services is a big deal. And so this acknowledgement, to me, I think that parents need to understand the gravity of that acknowledgement. And I understand that it's language, it's par for the course, but it just is almost like flippant. Refusal to consent to services is a big deal, and parents absolutely have that right. But to associate a scholarship account with refusal to consent to services, to me, means there's a legal gravity here that's very real.
If the parent chooses to bring the child back into public education and the scholarship account is closed out, presumably that this clause disappears, right? The parent is no longer refusing to consent to services. Is that correct?
One would assume.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, that's what it says, because in line 416, which it's referring to B, not to C, but it's saying, my child, that I'm acknowledging that my child may return to public school at any time. And I think to your point of informed consent, I think that's what this is trying to build, is that a parent is saying, yeah, I really acknowledge that I'm taking a leap of faith, that I'm gonna go scroll through that list of providers, and I'm gonna find the best thing for my child, and then that's my responsibility.
Yeah. Again, I think we're saying the same thing. I just think the gravity of what that really means probably doesn't rest with most parents, especially if they've not been through like an IEP process.
And hopefully the program manager doesn't just take this legislation and copy and paste it into his disclosure form. Hopefully there's education in that process.
Yeah.
I would hope that
Absolutely.
USDE would require that of the program manager.
I would hope so. I am concerned as to why it's repeated in line 421 to 423. I can't for the life of me even track that back to like the language heading, but you do have some repeated lines there.
It just means that 421, 423 is, they're taking the same language and requiring that it be in a disclosure agreement that a parent signs.
So to me, that's up top, but then they repeat that same language down in D. At 421 to 423, and again, maybe it's semantics, I just wonder why that language is there.
Let's keep going.
Okay, I agree, it's 9 o'clock.
My kid.
So we haven't gotten very far through this bill. I really struggle when a bill has a marketing firm and we say things like Utah fits all, and it's for everyone, and everyone is qualifies, but not everyone is eligible. And we have a line in here that instantly puts guardrails around these things and will result in multiple applications being rejected. And that one is the preference based on family income. And I think if this is a low income scholarship program, then we need to publicize it as a low income scholarship program, because this is not for everyone. And so I don't necessarily take issue with the language. I take issue with the fact that we're marketing it as everybody can partake, when in reality, it's for less than 1% of Utah students, and not everybody can partake.
That is actually what a lot of the people who testified today said, that they felt that they could now do something for their child. And the reality is that most of them will not get the opportunity to do anything for their child with this.
Right.
So are you saying that you want the legislature to take their funding from 47 million or whatever it was to 470 million?
What I'm saying is that if they're going to do a voucher program, it should be a universal voucher program, and everybody should have access to some amount of money. If they didn't do $8,000, they could do a smaller amount of money and cover a whole lot more children.
Or they should say this is for only low-income families, and be honest about this is a program for low-income families. But I think what you're saying is it's not an honest marketing when you say Utah fits all, and you get all these families coming saying we need it, we need it, we need it, we need it, and we know that not all of them are going to get it. They may qualify, but they're going to first hit the families that are low income, which one of the ladies talked about the polygamous families that may take advantage of it first, and they've got 10 kids in their family. That's going to eat that up right away. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. That's a what if, right? But there are lots of families that are big here in Utah, and this is a limited program. Mm-hmm. And they're making it sound like everyone can do this, and I think that they need to be a little more intellectually honest about it.
Yeah. And I do think that as you talk, I was really kind of taken back by that public comment today, because what went through my mind is not only do we have polygamous families with multiple children, we have legally single mothers. Mm-hmm. Because the faith tradition that honors those marriages, it's a spiritual marriage, not a legal marriage. So we have legally single mothers with multiple children, which produces an income state that would make, I don't know. It was just a comment that I hadn't thought about. It was a thing I hadn't really.
My understanding is a lot of them use the welfare program for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
So in that scenario then, so that you're not discriminating, because unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
that's what it is. Right now, if they're in a public school or a charter school, they're basically getting that 10,500 per child. Now they're gonna get 8,000 per child. I think that goes back to, I guess I'm gonna maybe backtrack a little bit and agree with Christina on some of the language when it goes back into supplies and all of that. You can't let this be a fraud thing, because the bill that was discussed right before this was dealing with that charter school using procurement to enrich members of their community. So I think that's a valid argument. I think that's something that has to be cleaned up.
Yeah. I think the marketing needs to be cleaned up. If I were to be super bold, it's either for everyone or it's for low-income kids. But we can't keep saying this is for everyone, because the reality is the bill language doesn't support that.
It should say for a limited number of low-income families.
Just for clarity, the language in the bill does say that it basically says that this funding is available for all students, regardless of income level,
Mm-hmm.
unless the number of applications exceed available scholarship funds for the school year.
Mm-hmm.
And then the prioritization kicks in.
Yes, that is fair in sporting, you're right.
Yeah. I think the first year, it's going to exceed it, without a doubt.
Well, we've got things that have been put in place that that are gonna cause these numbers. That's a conversation for another time.
Yeah.
I'll call you on my way home. You know, I think if we're looking back down here just a little bit, so let me read this to make sure I can articulate it well. Unless you wanna take one, Steve, go ahead.
Is this a new point?
It's a new point.
Okay.
I don't know yet. Sometimes I mark on this because I wanna come back and read it a few more times. Like we've had good discussion tonight, and you guys, I just don't read it that way. And I'm still not certain I agree with you, but I am gonna go home and read it a few more times, and sometimes I mark in my thing so that I can go back and read it.
Because I think what you got highlighted, I think is worth discussing.
Well, then let's bring it up,
So.
especially if we're in sub 1.
So what are the travel expense limitations?
It must be an Uber, and it must, well, when I say Uber, a vendor car ride, and it's no more than $750 a year.
So yeah, I see the $750 limit. It just says that it's described in subsection, and so I'd have to go to the subsection.
So I will have to highlight the new draft before I get involved in that, because some of that language has changed from draft to draft.
And that's what I was
It's
just
line
gonna say.
452 in the new draft.
452, okay, that's weird. Oh, okay.
Actually, that sort of bothers me because I drive my son 20 minutes each way, and it's my responsibility. It's not anybody else's to pay for that. So for them to allow for that transportation cost.
I looked at that, and I guess maybe when I read through that, I saw that a little differently, because it's going to have to be a qualified expense, right? And so that means you're gonna have to scroll down through that provider list, and I looked at that as saying that's a way that a private school could further bill a family, and I saw that as a protection, saying, hey, they're gonna provide a busing service, we're setting a fee. Or if they're going to do high school sports and there's going to be a requirement that the LEA, my son does swimming, he's gonna be on the swim team, and so the LEA is gonna have to charge something to my son for busing fees. Hey, we're capping that at $750, and maybe I'm reading that wrong, but that's, because it comes back to the $750 later on, but that's the way I read that, but maybe I'm.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just of the mindset that those are extras, and so extras shouldn't be publicly funded.
And I agree with that. I guess, and maybe I read it wrong, but I saw that as the nature between the LEA and, using those existing fees that are there, because that was one of the things that superintendent said, oh, we can do this just fine, we're just gonna charge $8,000 to come and take the science class.
Right.
And so I think that was in response to that.
Yeah. I think if we're looking here at 458, it's 458, and then I think it goes clear down to 463. And these are injunctions against the scholarship provider, and the scholarship provider, program manager. As I read this, it's in the may not. They may not do these things. And part of me, this is like set up like a monarchy. It's, you can have anything you want unless we say you can't. There's this idea, and I think, again, some of my consternation, if you will, if that's an appropriate word, with this bill language is the marketing of the bill is in direct contravention to the bill language itself. Either anything goes, or it has to be approved. Either anybody can be a provider, or they have to apply and be approved as a provider. Because the marketing says anything goes, and you heard that from the pro team today. Anything goes, I can take this anywhere, anything that fits me. But really what it is anything that the government says you can use, or our 3P institution says you can use.
And does that change when the program manager changes?
These are great questions. I don't know. I don't know that the bill language would support a response one way or the other. I think it would depend on how the RFP plays out and the agreement with the state
Or
board.
does the Board of Education decide what is approved, and then they tell the product or the program manager.
Specifically in the language, it defines that's the program manager's job. I think that's why that is
Right,
2.5
so they
million.
can, so if we get a new program manager, then they may decide, hey, this wasn't good, we're gonna change those rules.
I think that's a very good point, though, that I think there should be some kind of audit or approval through USBE that those program providers are said, yes, those are good, so that when we fire that program manager, because he stinks, you don't come in with a blank slate and leave everyone hanging when you start again. But I can see that concern. I think that's a really.
I mean,
good concern.
it could go either way. We could have a really bad program manager who is approving everything and it's not good, or we could have one that is not approving anything and they're being really strict about it. Do you see what I'm saying?
No,
like
I
you could
think that's
have
a very
these
valid
varieties.
Yeah, the one thing it does get into is the program manager responsibilities later on is it identifies that he has to have a system that's easy for parents. I think it goes as far as to say that every program provider gets a ranking so that if someone really stinks, I as a parent don't use that guy. But
So
I
it's
think
just
you
one
have,
person though that's the program manager.
well, it's going to be his business. I would assume that person, if they've got $2.5 million to work with, I was thinking about this driving home last night. I mean, if I were the program manager, I think this is an 8-employee operation, at least in the first few years as you're trying to build into that.
Yeah. So do they have even any idea who that's going to be?
No, they're going to put it out to RFP.
Okay.
That's part of why this bill is so long, is because you're trying to define who that program manager could be.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm sorry, does anybody have anything else? I'm trying to be more forward moving.
Yeah, let's keep moving.
I was up till 4 a.m., so I'm gonna take.
Hey, I have a quick question for you guys too. Hang on a second.
Yeah,
Sorry, so, have you guys looked into HB 22 and HB 77? I guess it's, I just heard about it tonight, but it's for local districts. It's, Amber Bonner from Alpine is trying to work with the legislators, and I guess it gives them, it's like something, it could give them more power, so if the district actually splits, Alpine can still control, like, buying things, and, like, it's kind of vague. Bramble's running it.
Stephanie, that was HB 22, and what was the other number?
And 77. It's supposed to be like, ASD would be working with legislators, and they want to create a special service district under the guise of maintaining economics of scale. So when the district splits, it seems a special service district would allow ASD to still control the money and the district. And like, I guess Amber Bonner from our district is working with our legislators, and Bramble and Stewart are running it, 22 and 77, amendments and revisions or something.
Was that one of the ones that you had, Gloria?
yeah. Drive safe.
Thank you. Sorry, guys, I
So-
was up till 4.
Yeah,
Be
be
dropped.
safe, sister.
I feel you.
So I have not looked at those. I just don't know when, probably in a couple days. I gotta get home first. You know, and I don't know where else we wanna take this. I think, you know, some of these things have been adjusted in the new draft. I still don't think that the new draft is good public policy, but some of the things that I have on my list are addressed in the new draft.
Bye.
You guys both taking off? You're leaving me here alone? I'm gonna have
See
to
you
tell
guys.
John Harvey I'm getting offline.
So I think we're gonna close up pretty soon, because he's gotta get home with.
Oh, well then, you know what,
His
this might be a
little
good
one.
time to, if we're
Yeah.
gonna have another conversation, but I think it just opens up, and I'm glad that there's like multiple sides of the situation here, with Joe here.
Yeah.
I still would argue that this is really poor public policy. I would argue that you cannot amend this bill into being good public policy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
You could,
I agree.
okay,
I think we need a constitutional solution, not a legislative solution.
and I think we need to do them in order,
Mhm.
because otherwise we're gonna end up with a mess. And that causes me great concern about the future of our state if we end up in a mess. And then we have kids that there's no continuity for their education, and that's important for children.
Yeah. My biggest concern, though, is nobody is pursuing a constitutional solution.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is this bill is likely to pass. And so I still think it warrants that we do the very, very best we can to identify the things that we think ought to change.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's going to end up a pretty tough bill.
Well, I think it's going to create more chaos than good in our state, and that causes me concerns. You know, I did just crude math. I'm a crude mathematician, and Joe, I don't know how you feel about this, but I did some crude math, and you know, today they talked about competition. When I would go back to it's not the government's job to create competition; it's the government's job to prevent monopolies. And I think even just a simple income tax exemption for and the numbers I have are actually quite astronomical. Even just those who presently homeschool, let's say every single one of them earns $90,000 a year, which we know isn't true, right? You're going to funnel at or about $4 million into the private school industry, an influx into the economy. And then we've got people who have taken the solutions of My Tech High or Harmony, and let's say they want out of those programs and they want into a tax exemption, right? Then you've funneled, seriously, I'm not joking, into the neighborhood of $10 million into the economy just through that tax exemption, which when you're talking about, you know, a $5-6 billion budget, that's a drop in it. I mean, it's just like a blip on the radar, but yet into a certain niche industry in our state, we're actually looking at quite an influx of cash into a market that didn't previously have that cash. And while I could be totally wrong in my math, like I said, crude math, I still think we're looking at a way to open up and stimulate the free market through a tax exemption, and I think that would be the moral way to go,
Yeah.
In my opinion. And I think it would be the constitutional way to go.
So,
Well, it's still up to know what the constitutional opinion is about a tax credit.
Well, I'm not asking for a tax credit, I'm asking for a tax exemption. I think a tax credit, we're going to end up with the same issues, specifically with strings government regulation. I think you're going to end up with government regulations and a tax credit, whereas a tax exemption, it's basically you just get to keep your money because you don't use the system.
and I agree with that, that just never happened.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because we're supposed to be a conservative state, right? And I think if there's the political will to push through bad public policy, we should be able to create the political will to push through good public policy. And again, I don't think we can amend this into being a righteous bill. It just, to me, has so many issues. But part of that is it's an omnibus bill. But part of it is the infrastructure here is just very interesting.
I've been taking notes, and it sounds like there might be a legislator that is interested in getting these notes so that they can understand what changes may still be necessary.
Mm-hmm. So what I was gonna suggest, and I'll send text messages and some stuff that I know people are texting me and wanting to know. So I think if you want to come up with your concerns and questions, we're not even gonna say who's asking them. I mean, I think we just kind of need to get a spreadsheet, because I know that people have been submitting stuff to Perucci, and she has been taking a lot of it into consideration, or making sure that it's explained whether we agree or not. But I think we should do that and have the list of concerns or questions.
Yeah.
And just have them all in one place, and then that would be easy for them, instead of telling one person something and then they say, it kind of happened, well, I've heard it happen this week where so-and-so said they said something, but that's not really how they said it, you know, and so I think it's easier if they can get it in writing, we can get it in paper, and
Yeah.
But I think the thing you really want to focus on at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, I think you'd be a lot more knowledgeable, but you really want to focus on what needs to be changed, because I agree, there's changes that need to make. Yes, I think it
That's
can
what we're
be
saying.
legislation, but I think you need to focus on the senators, because I think this is gonna pass the House.
Yeah.
I think it's the senators who've gotta say, hey, and then have it go back to the House and work through some of this.
Can we require an attestation of every member of the House that they've read this bill at least twice before they voted on it? And I know you
I know you're
giggle,
serious, and you
but-
should be serious.
but my biggest concern is that as I listened to people testify today, or I know they did not testify, I keep using that word and it's an
I know what
incorrect
you mean.
word.
I wanna make sure I was understanding.
No,
what you're saying.
but I want to be clear because I know we're streaming. I found out we're streaming, so I need to have clarity, right? When they spoke before the committee, there was a palpable evidence of the ignorance of what was in this document. And so I really do think that, maybe that's just me being hyperbolic, but I would love to ask every single representative in that house, have you read this bill at least twice? Because it's so convoluted. And it is an omnibus bill, but it's convoluted and it's hard to track, and you have to go from this section to this section to this section to this section. And, God is the author of order, and Satan is the author of chaos. And when I see something that is this hard to track, and you have to go here and go there and go there to understand the essence and the law and the policy itself, I would ask, if you've not at least read it twice, you should vote an abstention. You don't have to say no, just don't say anything. And that would be my question for those who are going to vote on this. Have you read it at least 2 times?
So Pericci said something interesting today that, because I agree that it was really late getting released. I mean, that's awful, that's bad government.
Yes.
But she had said something today, I think it was her, maybe it was someone else, that basically, people had read the bill and were giving feedback, and so I think this had gone to quite a few members of the House before it was made public, trying to get some kind of feedback and saying, hey, from last year to this year, would you support X? And so I agree with you, people should read the bill. If they don't read the bill, don't vote on it. I mean, that's good government, but I do think that a lot of the people who had concerns last year that are coming in and support were privy to this and had reviewed it before it was released, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but I don't think that the people that are changing their votes are coming into this totally blind either.
And that might be true.
Certainly, there have been caucus presentations on this. This is a big enough bill and a high enough priority bill that they've met in caucus to see if they've got the votes. And I'm sure Perrucci has given a presentation on this and answered every question she possibly can. Whether she's provided a copy of the original bill before it was released to the public, to every Republican representative, I doubt it.
Yeah, and I guess that's more of what I'm saying is, and to that point though, it should be read.
Yeah, I think it should be read. And
And this is one of the most complex ones of the session, no doubt.
yeah, and that causes, well, I keep using the term consternation. I hope that I'm using it in context and with its appropriate definition, right? But it gives me pause to know how many people have not read this bill. It gives me pause to know that the bill sponsor themselves didn't know some of the things that were in the first draft. That gives me great pause that admission came forth. And I think we should be very concerned if people are making those admissions.
Yeah.
Because we should know, if we're sponsoring a bill, we should know every single line.
So who are we sending the requested changes to? Who's going to synthesize this into a single document? What do you suggest, Jamie?
Her name is not Christina.
Well, I think if you guys just send me your, if you've already got it typed up, it looks like.
Well, actually, it's just
Oh,
highlighted.
you're just highlighting.
And
Well, she had been typing that.
What I wanted to do, I was just gonna tell Gloria, send me all the questions that you have and the notes that you took.
Okay.
And then I'll just put it all in a pretty little bow. And
Okay.
then we'll just text about who we think is appropriate. So we send it to Perucci and
Yeah.
Gilmore.
She's got to get it.
And I know it's gonna go to
Do we
senators.
know when it goes to the floor of the House?
It could go early as tomorrow morning. It's
Yeah.
past committee.
So, I mean, if that's the case, because I agree, there's changes that should come. There's a lot of the bill I like, but I think it's got a little work to do. But inside of that, are you better to focus on the Senate at this point? I'm not saying you don't send Carucci, but, the reason.
Well, I think we have to remember that if it passes the House and it's changed in the Senate, it has to go back to the House.
Right, that's what I'm saying, focus on the Senate.
So, but I, again, you know, as we close up here, I know you think this can be made into good public policy. I don't think that as this bill is written, even if you siphon them off into two bills like we should, that would be the righteous approach, right? I still don't think you can amend the fits part of this code into good public policy. I think the design is just inherently flawed, and I don't think you can amend it into good public policy.
It'll get read onto the third reading calendar tomorrow morning, and then it has to stay there 24 hours. So they'll vote on it Friday? Yeah, Friday.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow's Friday, Monday.
Monday.
So they'll vote on it on Monday.
And then they have to vote 3 times, right?
No, not in the House.
Not in the House? Why did they vote 3 times last year?
No, it's on, it will be read, so the House and the Senate rules are different.
Oh, okay.
The Senate actually votes twice on the same bill. The House only votes once. It's read 3 times, meaning it's presented once to the body, and then assigned to the Rules Committee, and then the Rules Committee assigns it to a standing committee. And then when it comes, so it's read once when it's assigned to the Rules Committee. It's read a second time when it comes back from Rules and is assigned to the Standing Committee. And then it's read a third time when it comes out of Standing Committee, like it will tomorrow morning, and is added to the third reading calendar. So
Okay,
it'll hit
thank
the
you
third
for that.
reading calendar.
But the Senate does vote
But
twice.
they vote twice.
Okay,
Yep.
good. I'm glad that, thank you for the clarity there.
But there's only one bill that's not circled on the third reading calendar, so it's very likely going to get voted on Monday.
All right, well, so, can we get the questions here with like sometime when do you think we can get the questions all gathered?
So I will.
Your time.
I'm not gonna take questions from this draft. I'm gonna take
Right.
questions from this draft. I just think it's fair and sporting to go
Of
from
course.
the draft that's on the table.
Yeah.
I will send you mine tonight. I'm just going to stay here until I'm done, because we need to get them to not Carrie Ann, but Candace as soon as possible.
And I've got to be leaving, because I got a little 9-year-old that's called me 3 times now waiting for me to come home.
Okay. And you're trying to lock up, are you?
Yeah, huh?
Yeah.
Are you trying to lock up?
No, Mike still be here if you guys need him here.
We like Mike.
Mike can lock up himself.
We like
He has access to the building.
Are you still live? Are you still live?
Sure.
Maybe we should like, see you later.
See you later, everybody. Thanks for
You
watching.
can shut down the live mic.
I'm just gonna be moving equipment back over to the office.
Okay.
But I mean, even after I'm done with that, and even if I leave, you can still connect.
Leave? Okay.
Yeah, getting out is not a
Something
problem.
that you can.
So we can get
You
out of the
go down
building,
and
just
out.
can't get in.
You just can't
Yeah.
come back up.
So you can stay as
Thanks for watching, guys.
long as you want.
Thanks
actually.
for being here.
Do you guys want my, just text me and if you want to send me questions that you have.
I think the cameras are
I'm just gonna put it all in one doc.
Oh,
So
wait.
I can
So
send
here. Oh, I don't know. That one.
They're voting on the Utah State flag again?
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, does Steve know when the Utah State flag's coming up again?
What was the
The
question?
flag.
The flag.
Oh,
When are they coming?
I don't know.
He doesn't know.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks,
Have a great
guys, for
night.
spending so much time,
Thank
and
you
thanks,
again.
thanks,
We'll see
Lisa,
you guys.
for getting James Lindsay. That was kind of surprising.
Yeah, no, I was glad he was able to join us.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry for the technical issues when we all first got here.
I'm not.
And it's like a brand new laptop. Like it's a total brand new laptop. Nothing's downloaded. I'm like, oh my gosh, John, you're making me look like a dork.
I am joking.